Hello, and welcome to the Snoozy Scientist. Wherever you are in the world tonight, I'm so glad you found your way here. This little corner of calm was made just for you, a quiet space where science and wonder come together to help you unwind as you drift toward rest. Tonight, we're traveling back through the deepest corridors of time to an age so distant it feels almost like another world entirely. It was long before humans, long before birds, even before the dinosaurs rose to greatness. The continents were still young. The air was thick and warm, heavy with the breath of volcanoes and endless forests. And in that ancient air, something extraordinary happened. Life, which had already claimed the oceans and the land, turned its eyes upward and conquered the sky. In that strange and ancient age, the sky was not a place of peace. It was alive, crowded with wings, teeth, and silent hunters gliding through the heat of prehistoric winds. Creatures so enormous that even scientists today struggle to understand how they ever lifted from the ground. They were not birds, they were something far older and far stranger. Some had wingspans wider than fighter jets. Others hunted from the air with jaws shaped like spears, their eyes sharp enough to track movement hundreds of feet below. For 150 million years, they ruled from the skies, soaring over continents, and yet they eventually disappeared. But who were these forgotten lords of the sky? How did life first find the courage to rise into the air? And what forces finally brought their dominion crashing down to Earth? Tonight, we'll drift together into that lost age. But before we begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from tonight, and what time is it there? Your comments are one of my favorite parts of this sleepy little community. If you're enjoying these late night explorations, a like and a subscribe would mean a lot. And for those already subscribed, thank you for being part of this calm little corner of science. Now, take a deep breath, let your shoulders relax, and together, let's journey into the forgotten age, when sky monsters ruled the earth. Before the sky belonged to giants, before wings beat against the sunlit air, the first quiet experiments in flight began. Not with feathers or great bones of power, but with small, scaly creatures that dreamed of floating between the trees. The earth was young then, still trembling from the wounds of extinction. The Triassic world breathed differently, cautious yet alive, rebuilding itself after the silence that had ended the Permian Age. Forests of tall ferns and seed-bearing trees reached for the light, and in their canopies, life began to test the air itself. In those forests lived slender reptiles with ribs that stretched outward like fans. Their names would later be given by scientists who found their remains in stone: Corydosaurus, Icarosaurus, and others now reduced to fragile impressions in rock. They were not masters of the wind, not yet, but when they leapt, their extended ribs unfurled membranes of skin that caught the air, slowing their fall and turning a simple drop into a graceful glide. It was not true flight, only a borrowed moment between gravity and ground. Yet in those brief glides, evolution found a new possibility. Imagine the air thick with humidity, the canopy glowing in soft green light. Insects buzzed through patches of sun, their wings flashing like glass. Below, predators moved through the undergrowth, shadows among shadows. High above, a small reptile edged along a branch, muscles trembling with decision. It pushed itself into the open air, ribs spreading like a living kite. For a few heartbeats, it became part of the wind. These early gliders lived in a dangerous balance. The trees offered safety from ground hunters, but distance separated the trunks. To move from one to another meant risk. Climbing down was slow. Running across the forest floor could mean death. So some adapted. They stretched, not in body alone, but in design. Ribs became rods, skin became sails, and air became an ally. Coelurosaurus, whose name means hollow-tailed lizard, carried its wings along the sides of its body, supported by elongated bones that once guarded its lungs. When it leapt, those bones extended outward, holding taut a thin membrane that shimmered with reflected light. It may have glided dozens of feet, steering with its tail, landing with a soft scuttle on another trunk. Icorosaurus, smaller and later in time, carried a similar structure but with finer control. Fossils show the pattern of its ribs, fanned elegantly outward like fingers spread to catch a breeze. They did not have feathers or muscles made for flapping. Their glides were quiet, dependent on height and wind. Still, they represented something immense, life beginning to challenge gravity itself. Each glide was a test. Each leap rewrote the rules of what a body could do. Some of these reptiles glided to chase flying insects that had already mastered the air. Others may have glided to flee from predators or to move swiftly between sunlit clearings. Their world was full of vertical challenges, and the air offered shortcuts to survival. The physics of their gliding was simple but elegant. By expanding their surface area, they increased air resistance, slowing descent and extending distance. Their bodies twisted in the air, tails acting as rudders, membranes flexing in invisible currents. It was not perfect, but nature was not seeking perfection. It was experimenting, sculpting answers one bone at a time. Across millions of years, these experiments would grow bolder. The same forests that cradled the gliders also shaped their descendants. Every leap was a conversation with gravity, and every landing carried lessons written in bone. The earth was learning how to fly. It is humbling to imagine that the first steps toward flight began not in wide open skies, but in the hush of ancient forests. The sound of leaves brushing against skin, the soft rush of air through ribbed sails. The world's earliest attempts at soaring were delicate, nearly silent things, but they planted the seed of an idea that nature would return to again and again. Later, others would refine it. The pterosaurs would come, the first true flyers, born from these early gliding designs. They would not merely fall gracefully through air, but rise against it, commanding the sky with muscle and instinct. But before them came these smaller dreamers, these cautious engineers of bone and skin, who first imagined the sky as something that could be crossed. The fossils of Coelurosaurus and Icorosaurus remain rare, pressed between layers of sandstone and shale, their fragile ribs still splayed like whispers of movement long stopped. Yet within those quiet stones lies the record of something extraordinary, the beginning of freedom beyond the ground. The Triassic air was not yet ready for vast wings or predatory power. It belonged to the gliders, to creatures who dared to leap into uncertainty and trust the invisible. And though their kind would vanish, their idea would not. Nature had glimpsed what could be done with a breath of wind and a stretch of bone. The next time it tried, it would not glide, it would fly. The forests that once shimmered with gliding lizards had begun to change. The earth was shifting, restless, molding itself into new shapes. Mountains rose, rivers carved through stone, and the air grew warmer. Across the coastlines of the late Triassic, life was reinventing itself once more. The quiet gliders had proven that the air could be touched, that gravity could be negotiated. Now something far more daring was about to unfold. In the deepening dusk of that ancient world, the first true flyers emerged. They were unlike anything that had ever lived, neither land-bound like their reptilian cousins, nor merely drifting like the gliders that came before. These new creatures had mastered motion through the sky itself. Their bones were hollow, delicate as reeds, yet strong enough to bear the weight of a living body through the wind. Their wings stretched wide, not from arms or feathers, but from a single elongated finger. This fourth finger reached outward like a living spar, supporting a membrane of leathery skin that ran down to their sides and legs. It was not a copy of the glider's ribs or the feathers of future birds, but something wholly original. Nature had designed a new way to fly. The first of them appeared near lakes and shorelines where fish shimmered just beneath the surface. Fossils tell their names now: Eudomorphodon, with its small triangular wings and a mouth filled with sharp, multi-shaped teeth; Dimorphodon, with a head large and strong enough to grip struggling prey; and others whose fragments lie buried across the continents. They hunted along cliffs and rivers, diving low to snatch insects or small creatures from the air and water. It is easy to imagine one of them lifting from a rocky ledge, wings catching the rising air of evening. With a few beats, it glides across the glowing surface of a Triassic sea. The air, dense with warmth, holds its body steady. Its hollow bones are light, but full of strength. Blood moves swiftly through its veins, driven by a heart built for constant motion. Muscles hum beneath thin skin, and each movement of the wings pulls it higher, smoother, freer. This was not the hesitant fall of a glider, it was power, born from the coordination of bone, breath, and purpose. Inside their bodies, changes had already begun that set them apart from every reptile that came before. Their metabolisms ran faster, burning energy at a pace closer to the warm-blooded creatures that would one day follow. Some scientists believe they may have been covered in a thin layer of hair-like filaments, soft insulation for creatures who could not rely on the sun alone to keep warm. They were no longer creatures of stillness or shade. They had become animals of motion, built for the constant conversation between air and wing. The evolution of their flight was not sudden. Each small change in bone and muscle built upon the last: a stronger chest to anchor the wings, a lighter skeleton to ease lift, a reshaped shoulder joint that allowed the arms to sweep in long, controlled arcs. Nature refined them with every generation, as if sculpting a masterpiece from air. What began as gliding between trees had become powered flight over oceans. The very first pterosaurs opened a new dimension of life. They could travel farther than any creature before them. They could search for food beyond sight of shore, follow warm winds across entire regions, and see the world from a height no eye had known. And yet their design carried fragility alongside strength. Their bones, so light and thin, often broke before they could fossilize. Most of what remains are fragments: a curve of jaw, a hollow limb, a faint outline of membrane pressed into stone. From these scattered pieces, scientists rebuild what the sky once held. When we look at the fossils of Eudomorphodon or Dimorphodon, we are not seeing simple reptiles. We are looking at the first engineers of air. Their anatomy speaks of balance and precision, of an age when the sky ceased to be an untouchable realm. They represent one of nature's most daring ideas: to live in constant motion, supported by nothing but invisible currents of air. These early pterosaurs were small compared to the giants that would one day follow, but they carried within them the blueprint of all who would ever fly. The earth, once ruled by creatures that walked and swam, now had something new: beings who rose above it. Evening by evening, the skies of the Triassic filled with soft movement. Wings brushed the air, catching the last gold of the setting sun. Below, the forests and seas continued their ancient rhythm, unaware that life had just opened a door that could never again be closed. In that moment, the world gained a new sound: the quiet rustle of flight, born not from magic, but from patience, experiment, and time. The pterosaurs had arrived, and the sky was no longer empty. The world had warmed, the deep hush of the Triassic had passed, and the Jurassic dawn spread across a gentler earth. Volcanoes still breathed from distant ridges, their smoke curling like fading memories, but the air itself had softened. Seas shimmered in blue-green calm, forests grew lush and towering, and the continents had begun to drift apart, leaving long stretches of coastline that glowed under the steady sun. In this new world, the first true flyers found space to grow. The fragile pioneers of the air had done more than survive. They had unlocked an entire dimension of life. Over time, their wings strengthened, their chests broadened, and their forms began to fill every corner of the open sky. The pterosaurs were no longer cautious creatures that hugged the cliffs. They had become the rulers of the wind. Along the ancient coasts, morning mists rose from warm lagoons. The surface shimmered, and shadows rippled over the water. Long shapes circled above. Their wings stretched wide like sheets of living leather, catching the gentle thermals that drifted from the sea. With narrow skulls and beak-like jaws, they swooped low to snatch fish from the waves, droplets scattering behind them like fragments of light. These were the first great hunters of the air. Species like Rhamphorhynchus and Campylognathoides filled the skies above Europe's shallow seas, their long tails trailing behind them like thin, balancing cords. Their wings curved perfectly to ride the warm air that rose from the sunlit surface. They were precise, efficient, and elegant, moving with a grace that seemed effortless. Further inland, other forms took to the wind. Some had broader wings made for slow gliding over forested valleys. Others had short, powerful limbs that allowed sudden bursts of speed. Fossil evidence tells of scavengers that watched the movements below, gliding down to feast on the remains left by predators. The skies had become more than a passageway. They were now a living ecosystem of hunters, feeders, and travelers. The variety was astonishing. Some pterosaurs had long needle-like teeth for gripping slippery prey. Others evolved wide beaks to sift through the shallows. A few lost their teeth altogether, relying instead on speed and precision. Over millions of years, their wingspans stretched farther, their bones adapted to new forms of flight, and their eyesight sharpened to spot movement from great distances. In the warmth of the Jurassic air, evolution worked like an artist with endless patience. Each coastline, each island, each inland lake became its own experiment. On one continent, the skies filled with small pterosaurs that darted through the air like swallows. On another, the wind carried larger forms with broad wings that soared from sunrise to dusk, rarely touching the ground. It was during this time that the world's first true aerial food chains emerged. Tiny insects drifted in the light, followed by small fish eaters that skimmed the surface. Above them, larger predators ruled, watching and waiting, their silhouettes crossing over the sun. For the first time in history, the sky was not an empty realm, but a complex network of life. Below, the oceans responded in kind. Shoals of fish shimmered near the surface, driven by the movements above. On the cliffs, nests of eggs clung to ledges, warmed by sunlight and the breath of the sea. When storms rolled in, entire colonies lifted together, vanishing into the clouds like drifting smoke. The Jurassic atmosphere made all this possible. Warm, humid air rose from the water and fed the thermals that lifted the wings of the Skylords. The planet's oxygen levels were rich, the winds gentle, but strong enough to carry even the heaviest forms. It was a perfect balance, one that allowed these creatures to grow larger and more capable than any before them. With every generation, their mastery deepened. They learned to use the air as both shield and weapon, rising on columns of heat, diving with terrifying precision, gliding for hours without rest. Their bones grew lighter still, their muscles more efficient, and their eyes could track the shimmer of a fish from 100 feet above the tide. As their diversity spread, so too did their influence. The presence of flying hunters changed how life behaved on land and sea. Fish gathered deeper when shadows crossed overhead. Small reptiles froze under the open sky. Even the shape of certain plants began to reflect the constant motion above, growing in patterns that bent with the prevailing wind. By the middle of the Jurassic, the pterosaurs had truly become the architects of the sky. They were not visitors but residents, shaping the air as whales shape the sea. Their wings carved invisible highways between islands and rivers. The sound of their calls echoed through valleys that had never known such life. Each flight, each glide, was a small act of triumph, not of conquest but of harmony. The air, once untouched, now carried the rhythm of beating wings, the flicker of motion against a sunlit horizon. The sky had found its rulers, and earth had found a new way to breathe. When the sun sank below the horizon, they settled along the cliffs and trees, wings folding like sails at rest. The air cooled, and the day's last warmth shimmered above the waves. Their shadows stretched long and thin across the stone, a reminder that life's greatest inventions often begin with a simple idea, a leap into the air, and the courage to stay there. The air has never been an easy place to live. It is thin, invisible, and unforgiving. To lift a body from the ground is to defy gravity's oldest rule. Yet somehow, life found a way. What began with small gliders and daring leaps had become a quiet triumph of engineering, written not in metal or gears, but in living bone and breath. The pterosaurs, those rulers of the Jurassic sky, were more than just creatures of grace. They were miracles of structure, every part of their bodies shaped by the language of flight. Their skeletons were hollow, but not weak. Each bone was a marvel of balance, a shell of paper-thin walls, reinforced by delicate struts inside. These inner supports, called trabeculae, worked like the beams inside a bridge, keeping the structure light, yet strong enough to bear the strain of movement. In a single limb, nature had solved the challenge of strength without weight. Their wings were unlike anything before or since. They were not feathered, nor were they stretched like the gliding sails of earlier reptiles. Instead, a single elongated finger formed the leading edge, supporting a membrane of leathery skin that stretched across the arm and down to the body, sometimes reaching the legs or tail. This thin surface caught the wind like silk, shaped by muscles and veins that adjusted its tension in flight. Fossils show traces of fibers within the membrane, giving it strength and flexibility, able to shift and twist like a living sail. Every motion, every beat of their wings was guided by physics that few creatures would ever master. The muscles that powered those wings were immense, filling their chests like engines of flesh. Their shoulders were built with deep sockets, allowing a wide range of movement. With every downward stroke, the muscles drew tight against the bones, pulling air beneath the wings and creating lift. To rise, they needed not only power but precision, an understanding written into instinct. The problem of takeoff has long puzzled scientists. How could something with such vast wings leave the ground at all? A creature as large as a small airplane, with wings spanning more than 10 meters, should have been trapped by its own size. Yet fossils and models suggest several elegant answers. Some may have used cliffs, letting gravity give the first push before catching the wind. Others lived on wide coastal plains, where warm air rose from the sand in shimmering columns. By facing into the wind and spreading their wings, they could ride these invisible currents upward, climbing without effort. Another theory tells of a launch unlike any bird alive today. The pterosaurs, with their strong limbs, may have used a catapult method. They would crouch, press their folded wings against the ground, and with a powerful thrust of all four limbs, spring into the air. Their wings would unfold in an instant, catching the wind at just the right moment. It was an act of perfect timing, an orchestration of muscle and momentum. In that brief motion, they transformed from grounded reptiles into masters of flight. Modern aerodynamic studies have tested these possibilities. Engineers have built digital models of their skeletons, tested replicas in wind tunnels, and simulated their flight paths through virtual air. The results are humbling. Evolution had achieved a level of efficiency that rivals modern aircraft. The ratios of bone to muscle, the shape of the wings, even the subtle curve of the membrane, all worked together to maximize lift while minimizing drag. Their bodies were living equations. The long necks balanced the weight of their heads, keeping the center of gravity aligned beneath the wings. The tails of some species acted as stabilizers, while others lost them entirely, relying instead on fine control of the wingtips. Their eyes, positioned forward and slightly to the side, allowed them to judge distance and motion, reading the invisible language of wind and light. Every flight was a negotiation between power and patience. To soar, they had to listen to the world, to feel how the air moved over rock and wave, how heat rose from the earth in spiraling thermals. They did not simply fight gravity, they danced with it. Even the largest pterosaurs, creatures heavier than lions, found ways to glide for hours without tiring. They would rise with the morning heat, circle high above the plains, and drift across continents on invisible rivers of air. Some scientists believe they could travel vast distances, crossing ancient seas that no land animal could. It is easy to forget, when looking at the fragile bones pressed into stone, that these creatures were once alive with movement and intelligence. Their flight was not an accident, it was the product of millions of years of refinement, a gradual perfection of nature's engineering. Each joint, each tendon, each hollow space inside their bones was part of a single breathtaking solution: how to live within the sky itself. The pterosaurs turned physics into poetry. They did what gravity said could not be done, not through brute strength but through design. To watch one rise would have been to witness the purest expression of balance, a creature shaped entirely by air, mastering the impossible through patience and time. In their wings, the Earth's oldest dream found its form: to lift away from the ground, to float where there is nothing solid to hold you, and to trust the wind to carry you home. The age of warmth had deepened. The continents were wide apart now, surrounded by shallow seas that shimmered under a golden sun. Forests of flowering plants had begun to paint the land with color, and herds of dinosaurs grazed below, unaware that eyes far above watched their every move. The skies, once filled with smaller, graceful flyers, now belonged to giants. These were the last of the pterosaurs, and they were unlike anything that had ever existed before. From the cliffs of ancient Texas to the hidden islands of what is now Romania, enormous shapes moved across the air. Their wings stretched wider than a fighter jet. Their shadows could cover a house, yet their bones were so thin that a human could crush them between two fingers. They were living contradictions, both delicate and terrifying, masters of air and land alike. The names given to them echo with reverence: Quetzalcoatlus northropi and Hatzegopteryx thambema. Both are remembered as the largest creatures ever to fly. The fossils of Quetzalcoatlus, found in the dry sediments of Texas, tell of a being as tall as a giraffe when standing upright. Its neck stretched long and slender, its skull narrow and pointed like a spear. When folded, its wings tucked close to its body, yet when spread, they could span 10 to 12 meters, almost the width of a small airplane. Hatzegopteryx was built differently. Discovered on what was once an isolated island in the Cretaceous seas, it was heavier, stockier, and more powerful. Its bones were thicker, its skull broader, its beak crushingly strong. Where Quetzalcoatlus seemed designed for long, effortless flight, Hatzegopteryx carried the presence of a hunter that ruled both sky and ground. The two may never have met, separated by oceans and continents, but they shared one truth: they were the final evolution of flight's greatest experiment. For decades, Scientists believed these giants lived by the sea, feeding like pelicans, gliding over the waves and snatching fish with their long jaws. But the rocks that held their fossils told another story. The remains of Quetzalcoatlus were found far inland in river valleys that once wound through dry floodplains. No shells, no marine fossils surrounded them, only signs of land and heat. This discovery changed everything. These were not coastal drifters. They were hunters of the plains. Their long beaks, once thought to catch fish, may have speared small dinosaurs or scavenged carcasses from open ground. Their thin, stilt-like legs suggest they could walk efficiently, striding across the earth like storks, waiting for the right moment to strike. When they lifted into the air, the movement would have been silent and sudden, a gust of wind followed by the vanishing of a shadow. How they managed to fly at all remains one of science's quietest wonders. The physics of their size seems impossible, with bodies heavier than a man's and wings stretching beyond the limits of modern birds. They should have been prisoners of gravity. Yet models and wind tunnel tests tell us they could soar for hours, perhaps days, carried by rising thermals that swept across the hot landscapes of the Cretaceous. They may have launched using their powerful limbs in a single catapult-like leap, lifting into the wind and catching invisible rivers of air. Once airborne, they barely needed to flap. The planet's warmth gave them all the lift they required. In the open sky, they ruled alone. No bird of that time could rival them in size. No creature on the ground could follow them across continents. Their reach was bound only by the horizon. From above, the world must have appeared endless, rivers glinting like ribbons of glass, herds moving as living shadows, forests rolling beneath clouds. Their reign lasted millions of years, yet they left behind so little. Their bones, thin as reed and hollow as flutes, rarely survive the pressures of time. Only fragments remain, preserved in stone like scattered whispers. A piece of a jaw here, a neck bone there, enough for scientists to piece together their form, but never their full story. Even now, each new discovery feels like uncovering the echo of something half forgotten. Some imagine them gliding through dawn light, the rising sun catching the edges of their wings. Others picture them standing still among ferns, their heads turning with slow precision. Perhaps they hunted in silence, relying on sight alone, or perhaps they scavenged, cleaning the bones of the fallen. The truth lies somewhere between imagination and evidence, balanced in the quiet of ancient air. What remains certain is that they were nature's greatest attempt at flying giants. The physics of their wings, the strength of their bones, and the power of their hearts all worked in perfect harmony. They were proof that life could stretch even the limits of air itself. When the sun set on the age of pterosaurs, these last sky lords were the final to fall. Yet for more than 60 million years, they had written their story across the wind. Every feathered creature that flies today, every eagle, bat, and swallow, still follows the path they carved through the sky. And though they are gone, their memory endures in stone and silence, in the shape of fossils and the movement of air. For as long as there is flight, the world will carry a trace of them, the monsters of the Cretaceous sky, who once rose higher than anything the earth had ever known. By the middle of the Cretaceous, the sky was no longer a refuge. It had become a realm of hunters. The seas and plains below teemed with life, but above them stretched a domain where survival depended on silence, speed, and precision. The great pterosaurs that once glided serenely through the air were now joined by fierce and specialized predators. The sky had turned into Earth's most dangerous battlefield. It was a world where shadows moved with intent. A warm breeze might pass across a lagoon, scattering insects and bending the tops of ferns, but sometimes the wind itself carried death. One moment, the air would be clear and bright. The next, a dark shape would fold out of the light, a set of wings slicing downward in perfect silence. By the time the creature below looked up, it was already too late. Fossils tell quiet stories of this violence. Pterosaur teeth marks have been found pressed into the bones of small dinosaurs and marine reptiles. In some layers of ancient rock, remains of fish lie with puncture wounds matching the narrow jaws of flying hunters. There are even fossilized fish locked in their final moment, their bodies twisted upward, mouths open toward the sky, a still frame of panic captured by stone. These traces reveal a truth that the rocks could not hide. Some pterosaurs were apex predators, capable of killing in midair or striking from above with terrifying accuracy. Among these hunters were species that lived along coasts and river mouths, where life gathered in abundance. They waited for opportunity, a fish breaking the surface, a young dinosaur wandering too close to the shore. From high above, their eyes could pick out the smallest movement, tracking it across water and sand. Their wings tilted slightly, catching the right angle of wind. Then came the dive. The attack was not a simple fall, it was a controlled collapse of distance. The wings folded just enough to reduce drag, the body narrowed, and gravity took over. They struck, with a speed no creature on the ground could match. Some caught prey in their jaws mid-descent, their pointed teeth closing around flesh and scale before pulling up again. Others seized their targets and climbed once more into the air, carrying the struggling bodies to dizzying heights before letting go. The drop alone could kill. Not all hunts ended in success. Sometimes a dive missed its mark, or the wind turned at the wrong moment. But for every failed strike, the instinct to perfect the craft grew stronger. Evolution favored those who could read the air as easily as others read the ground. The smaller pterosaurs hunted insects or fish, darting like arrows over the water. The larger ones, perhaps including some of the massive azhdarchids, hunted small dinosaurs, mammals, and even other flying creatures. Evidence suggests that they could move fluidly between air and land, stalking on foot before taking off in pursuit. To them, the sky was not a barrier or a border, it was an extension of the hunt. Imagine a warm afternoon on a Cretaceous floodplain. A young dinosaur, no larger than a dog, wanders among reeds, unaware of what hovers above. The air is still, except for a whisper of wings. A shadow glides across the ground. The predator folds its wings, drops with precision, and lands in a flurry of dust. The kill takes only seconds. The hunter feeds briefly, then launches again, climbing back into the air as if nothing had happened. Such scenes must have played out countless times. In a world where land, sea, and sky were all connected, no creature was ever truly safe. Pterosaurs bridged those realms. They fed on fish one day, small reptiles the next, perhaps even scavenging the carcasses left by larger predators. Their diet was not bound by environment but by opportunity. The skies above the Cretaceous world were not the calm blue we imagine today. They were alive with movement and danger. Great wings beat against the wind, each stroke a reminder that life had learned to turn the air itself into a weapon. The same physics that allowed pterosaurs to soar also gave them the power to strike from above with surgical precision. To fly was to see everything, to watch the world unfold beneath in shifting color and motion. But for these hunters, sight was more than beauty. It was strategy. Their eyes, large and forward-facing, could gauge distance, read the movement of prey, and predict the rhythm of wind and water. Every dive was a calculation, every strike, a lesson written into instinct. The fossils do not record the sound of their attacks, but perhaps they were silent, a rush of air, the faint hiss of wings cutting through heat, the splash of impact, then nothing but ripples. In time, their dominance shaped the world below. Fish swam deeper, birds began to evolve faster reflexes, and land animals learned to watch the skies as much as the shadows. The pterosaurs had turned the heavens into part of the food chain, claiming the last untouched element as their hunting ground. And so, for millions of years, death often came not from the water or the forest, but from above, swift, wordless, and unseen until the very last moment. The sky, once a place of freedom, had become a kingdom of predators. By the time the Sky Lords had reached their greatest power, something delicate was already stirring beneath them. It began quietly, hidden in the undergrowth, among creatures that walked on two legs and carried their ancestors' scales in fading patterns. While the pterosaurs ruled the open air, evolution was sketching another idea of flight, one that would begin not with membranes or elongated fingers, but with a thread of warmth. The late Jurassic world was alive with sound and color. Forests of conifers and cycads stretched over warm valleys, their needles whispering in the wind. Small dinosaurs darted through the shadows, hunting insects or nesting near streams. Among them lived creatures that looked almost ordinary, sharp-clawed, quick, and feathered. Their feathers were not yet meant for flight. They were meant for warmth, for show, and perhaps for love. Long before wings carried them skyward, feathers were a shield against the chill of night. Tiny filaments, soft and branching, trapped pockets of air close to the skin. They insulated life against the shifting climates of the Mesozoic, helping small, warm-blooded bodies stay alive when the air cooled after sunset. The first feathers were simple and sparse, more like down than the intricate veins we see on birds today. But they carried the promise of transformation. Over time, those filaments changed. Some grew longer, flatter, more colorful. They began to shimmer under sunlight, to spread in fans along tails and arms. They became signals, patterns of beauty and strength that might attract mates or confuse predators. The ground was their stage, but evolution was already writing a story that would lead upward. Among these creatures was one that would later become famous, Archaeopteryx, the ancient feathered one. Found in the fine limestone of what is now Germany, its bones lay pressed between layers of rock that once formed the floor of a shallow sea. When scientists uncovered it, they saw something that seemed to belong to two worlds. It had the teeth and claws of a small dinosaur, yet from its arms stretched feathers shaped almost exactly like those of modern birds. In that moment, the boundary between reptile and bird blurred. The world had witnessed the birth of something new. Archaeopteryx was no powerful flyer. Its wings were small, its breastbone weak, its flight uncertain, but it could leap, glide, and perhaps flutter through the trees. Each movement was an experiment in lift and balance. It may have used its wings to chase insects or to climb, using bursts of motion to help it reach higher ground. Where pterosaurs had conquered the open sky through power, this new lineage approached flight with patience and precision. As time passed, feathers evolved further. They grew stronger and more structured, with central shafts and barbs that locked together like threads in a weave. They became tools of control, able to twist and flex to guide air. Muscles beneath the shoulders, adapted to drive these new wings with rhythm and strength. Slowly, ground and sky began to merge. The first true birds were small, graceful hunters. Some stalked along riverbanks. Others lived among trees, nesting in the crooks of branches. They were light, agile, and endlessly curious. Feathers covered their bodies, keeping them warm and silent. The world beneath their wings was changing too. Flowering plants were spreading, insects were thriving, and the air itself carried new scents and colors. But with every new flyer that rose into the air, the balance above began to shift. The pterosaurs, who had ruled unchallenged for millions of years, now shared their domain with newcomers that flapped instead of glided, that could turn sharply and hover, that could build nests and care for their young in ways more delicate and complex than any reptile before them. The sky was no longer the reign of a single empire. It had become a meeting ground of two great designs. For a while, there was harmony. Birds took to forests and inland regions, filling the spaces between trees where the great leathery wings of pterosaurs could not reach. The larger flyers stayed near the coastlines and open plains. Each had their place, each found their rhythm in the endless cycle of air, but nature never rests in balance for long. Every adaptation invites another. Every innovation inspires competition. Feathers had given life a new freedom. They were light yet strong, soft yet resilient. They could keep a creature warm, dry, and hidden. They could lift it above danger or let it dive with speed and precision. They were more than tools of survival. They were expressions of the Earth's imagination. From those first threads of insulation came color, song, and flight. From the quiet warmth of a sleeping creature came the whisper of wings that would one day fill every sky. And though the pterosaurs still circled high above, their shadows now crossed paths with something smaller and faster, something that rose on a different kind of wind. Evolution had found a new way to master the air, and the sky, once the realm of leathery wings and silent hunters, was about to change forever. In the soft light of a Jurassic dawn, a small, feathered creature leapt from a branch. It beat its wings once, twice, and for a heartbeat it floated between worlds, no longer bound to the earth, not yet lost to the clouds, a single spark of flight carried gently by the wind. The skies that once belonged to leathery wings had begun to change. The great pterosaurs still soared over the coasts and plains, their silhouettes vast and solemn against the sun. But in the forests, in the valleys, and along the winding rivers, smaller shapes had begun to rise. Their wings beat with a sharper rhythm, their movements quicker and more precise. The age of feathers had arrived, and the sky had found new contenders. It was not a war of violence, but of design. Nature was quietly testing two different blueprints for flight. On one side were the pterosaurs, ancient rulers of the air, perfected through millions of years of evolution. Their wings were stretched membranes of skin, strong and supple, drawn tight between elongated fingers. On the other side were the birds, their wings layered in feathers, light, flexible, and alive with color. Each carried the memory of a different origin. The pterosaurs had evolved from reptiles that learned to glide over Triassic forests. Their bodies were shaped by the open air, their bones built like reeds, their hearts fierce and tireless. Birds, however, came from the ground up. Their ancestors were small feathered dinosaurs that once hunted in the shadows. They did not leap from cliffs or float over seas. They climbed, ran, flapped, and adapted. For a long time, the two designs shared the same sky. Along the coastlines, pterosaurs hunted fish and carrion, their broad wings tracing wide arcs across the water. In the forests, birds darted between branches, their feathers whispering through the leaves. Each found its own space, its own rhythm. Yet, as the world grew more complex, so too did the challenges that filled the air. Feathers, at first a tool for warmth and display, had become something extraordinary. Their layered structure allowed for control that no membrane could match. A single feather could twist slightly to adjust lift. Whole wings could curve and shape themselves to the changing air. Feathers caught the wind like fine instruments, turning turbulence into opportunity. They gave birds a kind of precision that felt almost deliberate, as if thought itself guided their movement. But feathers offered more than control. They offered insulation. Where pterosaurs relied on sunlight to keep their blood warm, birds carried their own heat, sealed within layers of down. They could rise before dawn, travel through cold winds, and explore new climates without waiting for the day to warm. This freedom changed everything. The earth itself was shifting. Forests spread inland, temperatures cooled at times, warmed again, then cooled once more. Seasons began to matter, and wherever the climate changed, the feathered flyers thrived. Their light bodies and rapid metabolisms allowed them to move easily between worlds, forest to coast, mountain to plain, warm to cold. They built nests, cared for their young, and filled the air with movement even when the larger flyers rested. The pterosaurs, though still masters of the open sky, were bound to the warmth of the air and the safety of the wind. Their great wings required space to lift. Their fragile bones demanded gentle landings and stable thermals. They were specialists, built for certain kinds of air, certain kinds of prey. Birds, by contrast, were generalists. They could perch, glide, hover, or flap for long stretches. They could live in forests, cliffs, lakes, or deserts. The sky that had once belonged to a single kind of flyer was now being redrawn by many. Over millions of years, the balance began to tilt. Smaller pterosaurs, once abundant, started to vanish. Their niches, the insect chasers, the small fish snatchers, the tree-line hunters, were taken by birds. Fossils show this slow transition, not in battles or sudden extinctions, but in gentle replacement. Where pterosaur bones grow scarce, bird fossils become more common. It was as if evolution had whispered a quiet handover. The membrane gave way to the feather. The ancient bones of the pterosaur rested beneath the new, hollow frames of avians. One design had not failed. It had simply met its limit. Still, the last of the pterosaurs remained magnificent. The great Azhdarchids of the late Cretaceous still walked the plains like living towers, still rose into the thermals like drifting fortresses. They ruled the open spaces the birds could not, but the world was changing beneath them. The forests thickened, the seasons grew less forgiving, and in the morning light, when the air was still cool, it was no longer the leathery wings that filled the dawn, but the flutter of feathers catching gold. Each beat of a bird's wing marked a quiet revolution. They burned energy faster but could recover quickly. They could turn with a twist of the wrist, dive between branches, and lift again before touching the ground. The air, once the province of gliders and giants, now belonged to creatures that could dance with it. By the end of the Cretaceous, the balance was clear. The pterosaurs were few, the birds many. The sky had not fallen to violence, only to adaptation. Evolution, in its endless patience, had chosen the lighter path. The membrane that had carried giants across oceans had given way to feathers that could travel through forests and across continents. And so, the air itself changed. What was once filled with the silent shadows of reptiles now shimmered with movement and song. The battle for the heavens had ended not with defeat, but with transformation. The sky, ever faithful to life's imagination, had found a new way to stay alive. The story of flight is written not only across the sky, but deep within the body. Beneath each sweep of air, behind every beat of wing, lies an architecture so intricate and so precise that even time itself struggles to erase it. Fossils can hold the shape of wings, but inside the stone, within the fragile patterns of bone and fiber, are the true secrets of how life learned to fly. Under the microscope, the differences between the pterosaurs and the birds reveal themselves like two languages describing the same dream. Both sought the sky, both found a way to lift their bodies into the air. Yet, they spoke entirely different dialects of evolution, one written in leather and light, the other in feathers and bone. A pterosaur's wing was a marvel of engineering. Its framework began with a single, extraordinary bone, the fourth finger. Stretched longer than the rest of the arm, it supported a membrane of skin that ran from wrist to body, sometimes even to the legs or tail. Under magnification, that membrane was not a simple sheet. It was a living fabric, laced with fibers called actinofibrils that reinforced it like threads in woven cloth. These fibers gave strength without weight, allowing the wing to twist and flex with every gust of air. Some fibers lay straight for rigidity, others angled for control. Together, they made the membrane behave like a sail that could both hold and release the wind. Within the bones themselves, the structure was even more delicate. Pterosaur bones were hollow, yet inside those hollows ran a network of tiny supports that kept the walls strong. It was a design that balanced fragility with resilience, able to endure the stress of takeoff, flight, and landing. The interior of the bone looked almost like coral, airy but strong, as if nature had sculpted the very essence of lightness. The wings of birds, by contrast, told a different story. Instead of stretched membranes, they carried a forest of feathers, each one a masterpiece of microstructure. The central shaft, called the rachis, held strength at its core, while rows of barbs branched outward, interlocking with tiny hooks that kept the surface smooth and unified. Under the microscope, these hooks gleamed like the teeth of a zipper, holding the wing in perfect alignment even as air pressed against it. Feathers were alive, made from keratin, the same substance as hair and nails, but their design was far beyond simple covering. They could separate and reform instantly, allowing air to pass when needed, then close again to trap lift. Every feather could move independently, guided by muscles beneath the skin. When a bird spreads its wings, it is not just unfolding a structure, it is activating hundreds of subtle movements, each tuned to the air. The bones inside a bird's wing tell of power and endurance. The arm bones are compact, thick, and shaped to bear continuous motion. Muscles anchor deeply into a strong, keeled breastbone, where every contraction drives the downward stroke that keeps the bird aloft. Blood vessels weave through the muscle fibers like rivers of energy, feeding the constant rhythm of flight. Some modern birds beat their wings 10 times a second. Others, like albatrosses, lock their joints and glide for hours without effort. In both, evolution found balance between strength and grace, between endurance and rest. In rare fossils, traces of the past still whisper these details. Scientists have uncovered imprints of soft tissue so fine that even blood vessels and muscle fibers can be seen. In one slab of limestone, the faint outline of a pterosaur wing shows the pattern of its internal fibers, preserved as if drawn in dust. In another, the fossil of an early bird reveals the shape of feathers still lying in perfect rows, the shadow of life frozen mid-motion. These are more than remnants of creatures long gone. They are blueprints, reminders that the sky itself once held many different answers to the same question. When studied closely, both wings reveal a simple truth. Though their materials and methods were different, they both solved the same problem: how to rise, how to stay, how to move through an element that offers no solid ground. Pterosaurs use stretched membranes, shaping the air like living kites. Birds built layers of feathers, turning air into something they could push and mold. One trusted tension, the other precision. One relied on the flow of the wind, the other on the fine control of its surface. Yet neither design was better in spirit. Both were triumphs of adaptation, each perfect for its time. Pterosaurs ruled the open spaces, where long glides and powerful launches mattered most. Birds conquered the forests, where agility and warmth gave them the edge. To look inside their wings is to see how nature works like a patient engineer. Every bone, every fiber, every vein has purpose. The secrets of flight are not just about lift or aerodynamics. They are about balance, the delicate negotiation between body and air, between gravity and freedom. Even now, as modern birds trace their lineage across the wind, the old designs remain in memory. Every soaring eagle carries in its skeleton the echo of those ancient frameworks. Every feather, every breath of air that flows beneath it, remembers a time when two very different creatures shared the same dream of the sky and achieved it in opposite yet equally astonishing ways. The sky that carried the first gliders was not the same sky that lifted the giants. Across millions of years, the air itself changed in weight, in warmth, in the silent chemistry that filled each breath. The story of flight has always been the story of the atmosphere, for wings are only half the secret. The other half lies in the invisible ocean that surrounds every living thing. When the first reptiles took their cautious leaps into the Triassic air, the world was recovering from loss. The great extinction that ended the Permian had left the planet empty and raw. The air was thin, the heat relentless, the winds restless. Oxygen levels hovered far lower than today, making each breath a small victory. The few creatures that survived grew lean and efficient, their bodies built to endure. Early gliders like Coelurosaurus and Icarosaurus learned to work with the air rather than against it. They did not soar far, but they taught evolution the first lessons of lift and balance. As the Jurassic dawned, the earth softened. Volcanoes still fumed at the edges of continents, but their ash enriched the air with carbon dioxide, and forests bloomed in response. Oxygen rose, the atmosphere thickened, and warmth spread across the land. This was the golden age of thermals, columns of warm air that rose from the ground and drifted into the sky. In that softness, flight became easier. The pterosaurs grew larger, their wings stretched wider, and their bones grew even lighter. The wind itself seemed to lift them higher. Each generation of flyers mirrored the air they lived in. In times of abundance, their wings expanded, built for soaring across vast coastlines and open seas. In cooler or thinner air, their wings shortened, built for power instead of distance. The physics of flight is a dialogue between body and sky, and the shape of that dialogue changed with every breath the earth exhaled. During the middle of the Jurassic, oxygen levels hovered around 30% higher than modern times. That meant air molecules pressed more closely together, offering greater resistance. To a wing, this was a gift. Lift became easier to achieve, and creatures could grow to sizes that would be impossible today. Pterosaurs took advantage of it fully, rising to wingspans that defied imagination. Their flight was not frantic but smooth, an art of gliding rather than flapping. They floated on invisible rivers of heat, steering with small movements of the wrist or tail. But the sky was never still. Across millions of years, continents drifted, mountains rose, and ocean currents shifted, all of which reshaped the winds above. The air over the tropics warmed and swelled, while cooler regions began to form seasonal patterns. Great air loops circled the planet, creating a rhythm that would one day give rise to monsoons and jet streams. The ancient flyers felt these shifts long before science ever measured them. They moved with the wind's moods, following the same invisible trails that modern birds still trace today. By the time the Cretaceous began, the atmosphere had changed again. Temperatures fluctuated wildly, and oxygen levels began to fall. The air grew slightly thinner, forcing creatures to adapt. The great pterosaurs, once masters of wide thermals, now needed more strength to stay aloft. Their wings evolved new shapes, longer, narrower, more precise. Their muscles grew stronger, and their flight became a conversation between power and patience. Meanwhile, the birds were rising. Their feathers, efficient and adaptable, allowed them to generate lift even in thinner air. They could twist and turn more easily, adjust mid-flight, and conserve energy with every beat. In a cooling world, feathers also kept their bodies warm, giving them freedom to explore skies that might have grounded others. Scientists studying fossilized bone tissue have found evidence of this atmospheric dance written deep within the skeletons. The density of bone, the ratio of muscle attachment, even the size of lung cavities all reflect the air that creature breathed. In a way, the bones of pterosaurs and early birds are small time capsules holding traces of ancient climates, records of invisible currents that once shaped entire lives. The chemistry of air is a quiet sculptor. When oxygen rises, wings grow longer and flight becomes easy. When it falls, wings shorten and beats grow stronger. The balance of carbon, nitrogen, and moisture in the air decides not only the shape of clouds but the shape of evolution itself. Flight is physics in motion, but also a form of storytelling. Each wing beat is a sentence written in air, describing the world as it was in that fleeting moment. Even today, when a bird glides across the morning sky, it is repeating the same calculations that pterosaurs once performed in the Cretaceous light. It tilts its feathers to catch a thermal, shifts its weight to ride a breeze, and trusts the invisible texture of the air to hold its weight. What feels like instinct is really memory, a deep, genetic knowledge of how the earth once breathed. When the great pterosaurs vanished, the sky did not empty. The air that had carried them still moved, still flowed, still whispered the same equations of lift and drag. New creatures would rise to fill it, following the same invisible patterns that had guided wings for 200 million years. To understand flight is to understand the planet itself. Every gust of wind, every rise in warmth, every breath of oxygen is part of a chain that connects all who have ever touched the sky. The physics of flight is not just a triumph of biology, but a reflection of Earth's own heart, a living mirror of the changing air that shaped every wing and every dream that ever learned to rise. There are places on Earth where time did not move forward as it should have, where the quiet work of decay was interrupted and a single moment was sealed away for millions of years. These places are rare, fragile, and extraordinary. They are the windows through which we glimpse the forgotten skies. When most living things die, their stories vanish quickly. Flesh dissolves, bones scatter, and rain and soil carry the traces away. But in certain corners of the ancient world, conditions came together to stop that disappearance. The air stilled, the water deepened, sediments fell like the softest blankets, layer upon layer, pressing life into the pages of stone. Among these quiet miracles are three of the most remarkable fossil sites ever found: Solnhofen in Germany, Santana in Brazil, and Jehol in China. Each one captures a different piece of the sky's memory, frozen with such care that even the faintest lines of wings, feathers, and skin remain. The Solnhofen limestone lies at the heart of Bavaria. In the late Jurassic, it was a lagoon ringed by islands and protected from the open sea by coral reefs. The water was still and heavy with salt, a place where little could live and even less could disturb what sank to the bottom. When creatures fell into it, they were buried in fine, chalky mud before scavengers or currents could reach them. Over millions of years, those soft sediments hardened into stone. When they were split open, the slabs revealed scenes of astonishing clarity. Here, the outline of a dragonfly's wing still glimmers like glass. There, the imprint of a jellyfish rests beside a feather, and among them lies one of the most famous fossils of all, Archaeopteryx. Its delicate feathers are preserved in ghostly detail, each quill pressed into limestone so finely that scientists can see where the barbs once interlocked. Through Solnhofen, we can see the moment when flight itself was still undecided, when the sky held both reptiles and the first birds. Its fossils are more than remains. They are memories captured mid-motion, showing how evolution tested shapes, textures, and possibilities. The lagoon became a library of wings. Far across the ocean and deep in time, another treasure formed beneath the tropical sun of what is now northeastern Brazil. The Santana Formation, born in the Cretaceous, was once a vast network of rivers and lagoons that drained into the ancient Atlantic. Its waters carried silt rich in minerals that wrapped around the fallen bodies of fish, insects, and pterosaurs. Over time, these minerals created natural molds around the soft tissue, capturing even the smallest details: muscles, blood vessels, and the thin membranes of wings. From Santana come fossils of pterosaurs, so vivid that we can still trace the folds of their skin and the fine textures of their crests. In some, traces of color pigments remain, suggesting that their wings were not dull but patterned, perhaps shining in sunlight. Others preserve shapes of their stomachs, still filled with fish bones or small prey, offering clues to how they lived. The Santana fossils remind us that flight was not only a feat of physics, but of flesh and color, that the sky was alive with brightness and movement, not just bone and shadow. In those warm Cretaceous winds, creatures like Anhanguera and Tapejara glided above waters that reflected the same blue they ruled from above. The fossils tell us they were real, not imagined, and that they once filled the world with sound and light. The third site, Jehol in northeastern China, reveals yet another kind of magic. Formed from ancient volcanic lakes, Jehol's sediments were rich in fine ash, laid down by eruptions that blanketed the landscape in delicate layers. This ash, deadly at the moment it fell, became a gift to science. It preserved the most fragile details, not only feathers and scales, but even the colors and microscopic structures of ancient skin. From Jehol come fossils of feathered dinosaurs and early birds, so perfectly kept that their colors can sometimes be read in the stone. Under microscopes, scientists have found the shapes of melanosomes, the pigment-carrying structures inside cells, still intact. From these, we can tell that some creatures bore iridescent sheens, blues and reds, that shimmered in the light, while others wore soft browns and grays that blended into forest shade. These fossils bridge the worlds of the living and the vanished. They show that feathers were not only tools for warmth or flight, but also canvases for display. A bright pattern might have drawn a mate. A muted color might have hidden a hunter. Through the silent evidence of minerals and pigments, we are beginning to see the skies of prehistory, not in black and white, but in full, vivid color. Together, Solnhofen, Santana, and Jehol are like chapters in a book that the Earth almost forgot to write. Each captures a different time, a different atmosphere, a different design of wing. Solnhofen shows the dawn of feathers. Santana captures the height of the pterosaurs' rule. Jehol reveals the spread of birds as they began to claim the air for themselves. When scientists split open these stones, they are not just uncovering fossils, they are unlocking time. The wings imprinted in the rock are whispers from a world long gone, yet they remain precise enough to teach us how flight looked, how it worked, and how it felt to exist in those vanished skies. The air of today is filled with echoes of that ancient past. Every bird that lifts from a branch, every gust that carries its feathers upward, moves through the same invisible currents that once held the pterosaurs and the first avians. The fossils only remind us that time, though it passes, still leaves fingerprints, faint but eternal, pressed into stone, waiting for someone to look closely enough to see that the sky itself once lived. For millions of years, the skies belonged to creatures of strength and grace, yet even the most powerful among them began life in the quietest of places. Long before a pterosaur ever felt the wind under its wings, it existed as something fragile and still, a small egg buried in the warmth of the earth. In the Cretaceous world, along ancient coastlines and river deltas, colonies of pterosaurs gathered where sand met sea. Fossils tell of these places, wide, sunlit stretches of land marked by countless shallow hollows. Within those hollows, scientists have found the delicate remains of eggs, clustered close together as if the wind itself had guarded them. Many were buried under thin layers of sediment, the same way modern reptiles hide their young to keep them safe from heat and predators. The eggs are small, leathery, and soft-shelled, more like those of turtles than birds. Their thin texture suggests they were never meant to endure the dry air for long. Instead, they rested beneath soil or vegetation, where moisture and warmth could cradle life inside. In some rare finds, the embryos within remain curled, their tiny wings folded close, their bones not yet hardened. These fragile fossils show us the earliest moments of flight, long before it began. In one fossil bed in northwestern China, hundreds of eggs were discovered together, their shells preserved beneath a blanket of fine mud. Some contained hatchlings, frozen in different stages of development. Others were empty, their contents long vanished, yet the arrangement itself spoke clearly. These were not scattered by chance. They belonged to a colony, a gathering of parents who returned to the same place, year after year, to bring new life into the air. Such colonies must have been busy, noisy worlds. Adults likely circled above the nesting grounds, their wings flashing in the sunlight. Others walked the shorelines, searching for food to feed the young. The air would have been filled with soft cries, rustling, wings, and the scent of salt and heat. The sand beneath would bear the tracks of hundreds of feet, small, webbed impressions leading from nest to water and back again. Fossilized footprints reveal the order within that chaos. Patterns in the rock show paths of adults walking side by side, perhaps forming trails to and from nesting sites. In other places, smaller prints appear between larger ones, as though the young walked among their elders. These quiet imprints tell a story of community, a world where life was not lived alone. Pterosaur hatchlings, once freed from their eggs, were already built for motion. Their wings were small but strong, their bones fully formed, and their teeth sharp. They were not helpless nestlings like many modern birds. Instead, they were likely capable of walking soon after birth, and perhaps even gliding short distances under the watch of nearby adults. Scientists call this form of independence precocial, meaning the young were ready to face the precocial world early. Yet the presence of such large nesting colonies suggests something deeper than mere survival. Perhaps these gatherings offered protection. 1,000 nests together would be harder for predators to raid than a single one alone. Or perhaps there was a social rhythm to these colonies, a shared instinct to stay close, to guard, to return. Fossil evidence hints that pterosaurs came back to the same nesting grounds for generations, building layers of life upon layers of earth. Each season, new eggs were laid atop the old sediments, and each season, new wings rose into the air. Within the nests, hatchlings may have clustered in groups, their movements clumsy but curious. They might have tested their wings against the breeze, hopping or gliding across the dunes while adults kept watch from nearby rocks. As they grew, they would join the evening skies, learning to ride the same thermals that once carried their ancestors. Every generation repeated the same gentle cycle, from sand to sky, from fragility to flight. In Patagonia, another fossil site reveals bones of both adults and juveniles together, scattered across an ancient lakeshore. The smaller bones are delicate, the larger ones sturdy and fused, suggesting that young and old shared the same space. Perhaps the adults nested in groups, cared for the hatchlings, or guided them toward safer feeding grounds. Though the exact behaviors are lost to time, the evidence points toward a complex and social life, one built not only on flight, but on connection. It is humbling to imagine such gatherings, Thousands of wings once rose and settled here, and countless lives began beneath the same sun. The colonies were not places of solitude, but of sound and motion, of continuity across generations. The air above them shimmered with the promise of new beginnings, while the earth below held the memory of every egg that ever cracked open to greet the world. In the end, these fossil nesting sites remind us that even the greatest creatures of the sky began small, unseen, and tender. Their power was not born in the wind, but in the patience of the earth, in the warmth of buried eggs, in the quiet care of their kind, and in the shared rhythm of returning life. Each footprint, each shell, each fossilized wing is a fragment of that eternal cycle, proof that even in the age of monsters, the sky's future began in a nest. The world beneath the ancient skies was never still. While pterosaurs and early birds ruled the air, their shadows moved constantly across the land and sea, and every creature below learned to live beneath those moving shapes. For millions of years, the air was both beautiful and dangerous, a silent kingdom that shaped life in ways unseen. Every flap of a wing carried consequence. When a shadow passed over the water, fish darted deeper. When it swept across the open plains, herds stirred and tightened their ranks. The air was alive with hunters, and so the earth below began to change. The rise of flight did not only lift creatures upward, it reshaped everything that stayed behind. On the ground, small dinosaurs learned caution. The open spaces that once felt safe became risky, exposed to the silent danger above. Many evolved colors that blended into stone and dust. Some wore mottled patterns across their scales, mirroring the broken light that filtered through trees. In the fossilized skin of ancient herbivores, scientists have found evidence of these natural disguises, a mix of light and shadow that once softened their shapes against the sun. Even the giants were not beyond the influence of wings. Herding behavior, once simple protection from ground predators, gained new purpose. A single large creature might draw the attention of an aerial hunter, but many together could confuse or shield one another. Fossil trackways show how certain herbivorous dinosaurs moved in tightly coordinated groups, their steps overlapping, their paths looping in wide arcs. These movements were not random. They were strategies written by the sky. Near coastlines, the effect of flight reached into the sea. Pterosaurs that hunted fish would glide low over shallow waters, their long jaws ready to strike. Schools of fish, sensing the shifting light above, began to swim in synchronized motion, a living defense that twisted and rippled as one. This fluid choreography, still seen in fish today, may have begun under the constant threat of shadows. Predation from the air taught the oceans to dance. On land, evolution found other answers. Some small reptiles became faster, able to dart between the cover of ferns. Others took refuge in burrows or learned to freeze in place, trusting stillness over speed. The delicate balance between hunter and hunted wove itself into every part of life. Over time, flight became more than a behavior. It became a force that shaped the rhythm of entire ecosystems. In forests, the canopy grew dense, layer upon layer, as plants adapted to life under the watch of wings. The tallest trees reached for light, while the undergrowth thickened to hide the creatures that could not. Even the plants themselves were influenced by the movements above. Insects carried pollen from one bloom to another as they fled from small feathered hunters, linking flight to the spread of life in ways neither predator nor prey could have imagined. The seas, too, began to mirror the air. Creatures that lived near the surface grew lighter and quicker. Ancient ammonites, coiled in their shells, drifted lower in the water when skies darkened, using the deep as a shield. Marine reptiles, larger and slower, developed sharper senses, able to detect the ripples of danger from above before it arrived. The sky's presence changed more than behavior, it changed time itself. The cycles of day and night grew sharper as creatures learned when it was safe to move. Morning and evening, when the light was soft and shadows long, became hours of stillness for those below. The midday sun, when wings glowed brightest, became a time of hiding. The world began to move in patterns of rhythm and retreat, each life adjusting to the pulse of the air. Flight had created a new layer of reality. It was no longer enough for a creature to watch the ground. It had to listen to the wind, to sense the faint shift of light that meant something larger was passing overhead. The eyes of many species changed, growing wider and more sensitive to contrast. The ears of small mammals tuned themselves to the sound of feathers slicing through air. Evolution did not stand still beneath the wings. It listened, it adapted, and it learned. Even the great predators of the ground had to adapt. Some carnivorous dinosaurs developed upward-facing eyes and longer necks, able to strike at low-flying prey. Others began to coordinate their hunts, using the confusion of wings and movement to trap those that tried to flee. The sky and the earth became partners in a constant dialogue of survival, one where every innovation above inspired another below. In that long conversation between air and ground, life discovered its balance. The hunters of the sky sharpened the instincts of those beneath them, and in turn, the cunning of the earth tested the mastery of flight. Every adaptation, every new color, every shift in motion was part of a shared rhythm that bound all creatures together. The world below the wings was not a separate realm, but a reflection. Every gust, every dive, every ripple of shadow left an imprint on the land. And in those quiet adjustments, the blending of scales, the tightening of herds, the flick of a tail beneath a canopy of light, the planet learned harmony between what soared and what stayed. The air above and the ground below were never truly apart. They were two halves of the same living system, shaping one another with patience and precision. In that connection, evolution found its poetry, and the earth, for the first time, became a world that breathed in more than one direction, upward to the sky and downward into the waiting soil. The end came quietly at first, as endings often do. No creature in the world could have imagined that a single day would end an age that had lasted for more than 150 million years. The skies were still alive then, heavy with wings and motion. Pterosaurs drifted over coastlines in the evening light, and early birds sang from the branches of flowering trees. It was a world thriving in rhythm, until the day when the rhythm broke. 66 million years ago, far from where those wings beat the air, a mountain of stone was falling through space. It moved faster than sound, faster than thought, faster than any living thing had ever seen. The asteroid was miles wide, a remnant of the early solar system that had wandered too close to Earth's gravity. And when it came, it struck not as a stone but as a sun. It hit the shallow sea off the coast of what is now Mexico, in a place called Chicxulub. In a single instant, the air ignited. The sea rose upward as fire. The shock wave traveled faster than any wind, flattening forests, shattering bones, and lifting sand into the sky. A wall of molten rock spread outward, and everything within hundreds of miles simply ceased to exist. But the true devastation came from what followed. The impact tore a wound into the earth so deep that it released gases and dust into the air by the billions of tons. Ash and rock vapor shot into the upper atmosphere, carried by the winds until they wrapped the planet in a shroud of shadow. The light of the sun dimmed, then vanished. The sky that had once been home to giants turned gray, then black. For the pterosaurs, creatures built to live by air and sight, the change was unbearable. The thermals that once carried them upward disappeared. The warm breezes cooled to silence. The ocean below, once rich with fish, turned dark and lifeless as plankton died in the absence of sunlight. Food chains that had stretched from coral reef to sky simply collapsed. In the first days, after the impact, those who could fly were trapped by the air itself. Clouds of soot and ash thickened until the air was heavy to breathe. Rain began to fall, not as water but as acid, burning leaves and washing minerals from the soil. Trees withered, rivers turned to sludge, and the winds fell still. The great pterosaurs, the giants that had once glided for hours on rising heat, were suddenly grounded. Their wings, vast and powerful, now meant nothing. With no sunlight to warm the ground, no thermals rose to lift them. Their energy drained faster than it could be replaced, and their food sources disappeared one by one. Even the smaller species, the ones that had shared the skies with early birds, struggled to endure. Insects vanished, fish grew scarce, and the once living air grew too cold and too thin. Fossils tell us that within only a few years, the great lineage of pterosaurs had ended. Their bones, already fragile, fell into the soft mud and vanished beneath the weight of silence. The birds fared little better. Most of their kind perished too, but a few, small and adaptable, survived by retreating to the ground, eating seeds that could endure the cold. In them, flight would one day return, reshaped but never forgotten. Yet for that long, dark age, the skies were empty. The Earth's heartbeat slowed, temperatures dropped, and darkness lasted for months, perhaps years. Even when the light finally returned, it came weakly through a veil of dust. The forests were gone, replaced by ferns and scrub. The oceans had turned green with decay. The age of reptiles, of thunder and wings, was over. It is strange to imagine how sudden it must have been. The same sky that once shimmered with life was now motionless. The echoes of beating wings were replaced by the whisper of ash settling to the ground. The silence that followed was not peace, but exhaustion, the long stillness of a planet beginning to heal. When the world finally brightened again, the giants were gone. No more pterosaurs waited on cliffs at dawn. No vast shadows drifted across the waves. Only the wind remained, passing over the empty coasts where they had once nested. And yet, in the softest way, their story was not entirely lost. The air that had carried them still remembered the shape of their flight. The winds that once bent around their wings still curled across the same oceans. The skies that had fallen silent would one day fill again, not with their kind, but with the echoes of what they taught the world: how to rise, how to glide, how to trust the invisible. But for a time, long and dark and endless, the earth rested. The sky that had once ruled the world hung still, heavy with dust and grief. The monsters of the air were gone, and the age of light had ended. All that remained was quiet, a quiet so deep it felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for life to try again. When the darkness finally began to lift, the world that emerged was quiet and hollow. The great forests were gone, their trunks reduced to blackened stumps. The rivers carried ash instead of life, and the air was still heavy with the scent of burnt stone. The sky, once filled with the sound of wings, was empty. The giants who had ruled it, the pterosaurs, the last of their kind, were gone. But somewhere, hidden beneath layers of fallen leaves and soot, a heartbeat continued. In the smallest corners of that ruined earth, life had found a way to wait. Beneath roots, inside burrows, and deep in sheltered nests, a few creatures endured the long night. Among them were the birds, fragile descendants of feathered dinosaurs. Their bodies were light, their bones hollow, their hearts fast. Yet it was not strength that saved them, but simplicity. The air that once belonged to vast wings now held only faint movement. Small birds, scarcely larger than a hand, hopped among the debris, they fed on, seeds that had survived the firestorm, their sharp beaks cracking open the promise of new life. Where other creatures had depended on sunlight and plenty, the birds lived on what little remained, stored energy hidden in shells and husks. It is strange to think that something so delicate could survive what the mighty could not. But evolution favors not only power, it favors adaptability. The birds were small enough to hide, light enough to move, and clever enough to eat whatever they could find. When the skies darkened and food chains collapsed, their world did not end, it simply changed shape. Their ancestors had already been learning for millions of years. Long before the catastrophe, they had nested in trees, on cliffs, and in hidden crevices. They had evolved parenting strategies that gave their young a better chance than most reptiles ever knew. They guarded their eggs, fed their chicks, and passed on knowledge of shelter and protection. When the fire fell from the sky, that instinct to nurture, to shield, made all the difference. In the fossil record, the first signs of recovery appear like whispers, a small footprint pressed into soft mud, a fragment of feather perfectly preserved in a new layer of silt. These traces tell us that the birds emerged not immediately, but gradually, as the smoke cleared and green returned to the land. The earth healed in slow motion, and so did the sky. The first survivors likely looked nothing like the colorful birds we know now. Their plumage was simple, built for insulation rather than display. Their calls were soft and short, echoes of the forests that had burned away. They lived close to the ground, near the insects and plants that had returned first. Their wings, once built for open air, now served to move between patches of survival, a bush here, a pool there. Over time, warmth crept back into the world. The oceans calmed, the air cleared, and sunlight once again filtered through the clouds. With it came plants, sprouting from seeds that had waited in darkness. Grasses spread, flowers opened, and insects swarmed in the light. For the birds, it was as if the world had reopened its doors. They adapted quickly, their beaks reshaped to match the new food sources, long and slender for nectar, thick and strong for seeds, sharp and narrow for hunting small creatures. Their wings grew in new patterns, some suited for soaring, others for darting between trees. Every small success became another thread in the web of recovery. The pterosaurs had ruled the vast open skies, but their size had become their prison. They needed warmth, lift, and endless food to survive. When the world turned cold and empty, they had nowhere to go. The birds, however, carried the power of flexibility. They could shrink their needs, change their diets, and find safety in smallness. Even in the deepest quiet, their songs began to return. Not all at once, but gradually, soft chirps over still ponds, distant calls from the edge of regrowing forests. Each note was a declaration. Life had survived, and it would rise again. From those early survivors would come everything that fills our skies today: sparrows and eagles, hummingbirds and herons, all tracing their lineage to those few who endured the ash and silence. The air that had once been filled with leathery giants now fluttered with feathers, fragile yet free. And as the first true dawn rose after the long extinction, the light revealed a changed earth. The sky glowed pale gold over a land reborn in green. The air was cooler, the silence softer. The pterosaurs were gone, their reign preserved only in stone, but the legacy of flight continued. Somewhere in that quiet morning, a small bird stirred in its nest, wings trembling against the new warmth. It took a breath, then lifted itself into the air, not far, not high, but enough to catch the wind. In that single motion, the story of the sky began again. The world that had fallen to darkness was breathing once more. The air, cleansed by time, now carried new life, And though the age of the monsters had ended, the dream of flight had not. It lived on in these survivors, tiny, resilient, and eternal, who turned the ruins of an old world into the beginning of a new one. When the dust of extinction finally settled, the world that emerged was unfamiliar. The air smelled of damp soil and new beginnings. Forests, once turned to ash, began to return as thin green shoots. Rivers traced new paths through valleys filled with silence. And above it all, the sky waited, wide, open, and empty. For the first time in millions of years, it had no rulers. But emptiness does not last long on Earth. Life, persistent and patient, began to rise again. In the stillness after destruction, evolution stirred softly. Small birds, survivors of the long night, looked upward once more. They were not the giants that once ruled the heavens. They were small, fragile, and quiet, yet in their lightness lay potential, the seed of a new empire that would spread across every sky on Earth. At first, the world was gentle in its rebirth. The air was cool, the light softer. The Paleogene period had begun. Across the continents, young forests took root where the fires had once burned. Ferns and flowering plants returned, their blossoms painting color back into the landscape. Insects multiplied quickly, filling the air with motion again, and wherever there was motion, there was opportunity. The early birds followed these chances. Some took to the trees, flitting between branches in search of fruit and seeds. Others scoured the ground for insects among the leaves. A few lingered near the water's edge, where fish had survived in deep pools untouched by the chaos. Slowly, quietly, the balance returned, and the sky began to fill again. But this new generation of flyers was different. The age of giants was over. Flight, once defined by size and spectacle, was now a story of variety. The birds of the Paleogene came in countless forms, each shaped by the new world they inherited. Some were small and swift, built for darting through forests. Others grew long wings for distant travel, finding food across newly forming coastlines. Each adapted not through dominance, but through creativity. Evolution, freed from the shadow of the pterosaurs, began to experiment. In the forests of what is now Europe, small predatory birds developed hooked beaks and sharp talons, echoing the hunters that once roamed the ground. In the open plains of North America, seed eaters evolved thicker beaks and clever habits, storing food for leaner seasons. On islands newly born from shifting continents, strange flightless birds appeared, reminders that not every creature needed wings to thrive. Everywhere, the rules of the sky were rewritten. The early Paleogene atmosphere was richer in oxygen than before, and the climate was warm and stable. Vast forests stretched from the equator to the poles, and birds filled every corner of them. Fossils tell of species with elegant tail feathers, others with long legs for wading, and some with beaks shaped perfectly for cracking shells or spearing prey. It was as if evolution, after surviving catastrophe, had decided to paint with every color it had. Among these early species were the ancestors of many modern families. The first true owls took to the night, their wings broad and silent as they hunted over sleeping forests. The early waterfowl appeared along lakes and swamps, their webbed feet and flattened bills made for life between air and water. The first perching birds emerged too, their feet adapted for gripping branches, the small songbirds that would one day fill the world with sound. What had once been a kingdom of giants became a chorus of diversity. Each flap, each glide, each trill of voice was part of a new rhythm. The sky no longer belonged to a few colossal species, but to thousands of delicate ones, each with its own place and purpose. The silence that had followed the Great Extinction was replaced by a symphony, soft, scattered at first, but growing stronger with every passing age. On the ground, mammals were rising too. They grew larger and bolder, feeding on plants and insects, sometimes on the birds themselves. But the skies now moved faster than the land could follow. The birds had mastered what no other creature could replicate: freedom of direction. They could travel where food was richest, escape when danger approached, and follow the seasons as they shifted. Across oceans, they carried seeds in their feathers and bellies, helping forests spread to new lands. Their migrations linked ecosystems that had been separated by the chaos of the past. Each journey was a quiet act of repair. Each flight stitched together a planet still healing from fire. And so, the rebirth of the sky was not an explosion, but a gradual unfurling. It began with a few small wings, cautious and trembling, then grew into a flood of color and motion that touched every continent. Within a few million years, birds had become the most diverse group of vertebrates on Earth, adapting to every possible way of living. The sky they inherited was softer now. The thermals were gentle, the air cooler, the light filtered through young forests. Yet from that calm came resilience. Each bird carried within it the memory of survival, a quiet instinct that life could fall and rise again. When we look at the morning horizon today, filled with silhouettes in motion, we are seeing the same rebirth that began in that distant time. The sparrow, the heron, the hawk, all trace their lineage back to the small, persistent survivors of the Paleogene dawn. The sky was reborn, not through strength, but through adaptation. The giants had fallen, yet from their absence came abundance. The world above the trees, filled once more with life, not loud or sudden, but steady, wings beating softly against the wind, carrying the story of Earth forward once again. Long after the sky had been reborn, when the wounds of extinction had faded into memory, a new kind of power walked the earth. The age of wings had not ended, but for some descendants of the survivors, flight was no longer necessary. The air had taught them balance, grace, and precision. Yet on the open plains of South America, those same lessons found a new form, one that no longer soared, but strode. These were the pterosaurs, the terror birds. For millions of years, they ruled the southern continents as the top predators of their time. Standing taller than a man, some reaching 3 meters in height, they were reminders that evolution does not always move in straight lines. Where once wings conquered the air, now they had become weapons of another kind, tools for speed and balance as their bearers hunted across the grasslands. The world they inherited was wild and shifting. The Paleogene had given way to the Neogene, and South America was an island continent cut off from the Neogene, north by the still-closed Isthmus of Panama. Isolated, it became a cradle of unique life. Great flightless birds evolved where mammalian predators were few. The land was filled with armadillo-like glyptodonts, horse-sized sloths, and herds of grazing mammals. Among them stalked the terror birds, their eyes sharp, their beaks curved like scythes. They were built for pursuit. Their long legs carried them swiftly across the plains, capable of speeds that few prey could match. Their wings had shrunk into small, strong stumps, useless for flight, but vital for balance when they turned or struck. At the end of each powerful neck rested a head designed for precision, a massive skull armed with a hooked beak strong enough to crush bone. Unlike the pterosaurs before them, the terror birds hunted not by diving from above but by chasing on foot. Fossil evidence suggests they struck with their beaks like hatchets, using quick, downward blows to stun or kill. Some species were small and agile, darting through brush and forest. Others, like Kelenken and Titanus, towered over their prey, using their sheer size to intimidate and dominate. The air had given their ancestors the gift of speed, and evolution had simply reimagined that speed for the ground. In this strange new kingdom, the birds were the lions and leopards of their world. They ruled for nearly 60 million years, from the cool forests of Patagonia to the tropical lowlands of what would one day be Argentina and Brazil. Their reign was one of balance, for in the absence of large mammalian predators, the terror birds filled the role nature had left open. They were not creatures of chaos but of equilibrium, ensuring that the great herds and foraging mammals below them never grew too numerous. Yet time, as always, brings change. The land beneath them was not still. Tectonic plates crept forward inch by inch, and the continents slowly began to meet. Around 3 million years ago, the rising of the Isthmus of Panama bridged North and South America for the first time in tens of millions of years. Through this new land bridge came the mammals, wolves, bears, big cats, and saber-toothed hunters. The balance that had defined South America's ancient world began to tilt. The terror birds faced new rivals, unlike any they had known. The mammals hunted in groups, relied on endurance, and cared for their young in ways that gave them a constant advantage. The birds, solitary and specialized, began to fade from the landscape. For a while, they held on, adapting where they could. The last of their kind, Titanus walleri, crossed into North America, roaming the southern plains that would one day belong to Texas and Florida. But even this final migration could not preserve them. As climates shifted and forests spread, the open plains that had favored the terror birds disappeared. Their prey changed too, growing faster, smaller, or more elusive. Evolution, which had once elevated them, now began to turn its gaze elsewhere. Slowly, species by species, the great walkers of the air vanished into the soil, leaving only their bones and the impressions of their taloned feet pressed into stone. Yet the legacy of the terror birds did not vanish completely. Their spirit of predation lived on in smaller descendants, the raptors, hawks, and eagles that took back to the air. These modern hunters refined what their ancient kin had begun. They carried forward the sharp eyes, the curved beak, and the precision of the strike, but they did it with wings. The blueprint of the predator, perfected long ago on land, had simply risen again into the sky. In this quiet exchange, nature repeated its favorite theme: adaptation. What once hunted on foot now hunted from above. What had once run now soared. The roles changed, but the pattern remained. The balance between hunter and hunted, the rhythm of motion that has defined life for eons. Today, when an eagle dives from a mountain cliff or a hawk circles over golden grass, they are not just masters of their age. They are echoes of those ancient giants who once thundered across the plains. The air carries their memory, the ground, their footprint, and so, even as the last terror bird fell silent, the essence of what it was, strength, precision, grace, remained alive in the wind. The empire of the sky had returned once more, not on leathery wings or heavy legs, but in the lightness of feathers, in the endless continuity of flight. The world had turned again, and the sky, as always, had found a way to remember. Before wings ever brushed the sky, before even the thought of flight existed in the long imagination of evolution, the world was preparing for it. The Earth of 300 million years ago, deep in the Carboniferous period, was a place of breath and shadow, a living engine that quietly built the air itself into something new. Forests stretched endlessly, dark and wet, their canopies woven from towering trees that were not yet like the ones we know. Their trunks were wrapped in thick bark, and their leaves were broad and feathery, drinking in sunlight through the heavy, humid air. Giant ferns, horsetails, and club mosses filled every corner, crowding the edges of swamps that shimmered beneath a dim green light. Beneath their roots, the soil was soft and spongy, made from countless layers of fallen plants that had never fully decayed. It was a world where everything grew and everything breathed. The air itself was different then. Oxygen filled more than a third of the atmosphere, nearly half again as much as today. Each breath would have tasted sharp and rich. Each flame burned brighter and hotter. The sky was denser, heavier, pressing down with invisible weight. It was a sky that could hold more than it ever had before. In that thick air, life began to test its limits. Insects grew to impossible sizes. Dragonflies the length of a man drifted above the swamps, their wings whispering softly through the moist air. Millipedes, as long as crocodiles, moved through the ferns, feeding on the endless carpet of decaying leaves. Even spiders and scorpions towered over the ground, their bodies supported by the atmosphere's strength. This abundance was no accident. The forests themselves were the architects of the air. Every towering tree absorbed carbon dioxide, locking it away inside its body, and released oxygen in return. Layer by layer, as the forests grew and died, they transformed the world's chemistry. The dead plants that sank into the mud never truly vanished. Buried under the weight of new growth, they became trapped in the earth, storing their carbon deep underground. Each fallen tree, each rotting leaf, added to the quiet process that would one day create the coal seams we mine today. The result of this endless green cycle was an atmosphere richer than any that came before or since. For the first time, the air could truly lift life. The world had, by pure chance, built the conditions for flight. But life was not yet ready to leave the ground. The creatures of this age still walked or crawled, their bodies heavy and strong. The great amphibians ruled the wetlands, their limbs broad and their skin slick with moisture. They hunted in the shallows, their eyes just above the surface of still water. Around them, the air was filled with the hum of insects, the first true masters of the sky. Insects were the pioneers, their delicate wings unfolding into this thick air like new thoughts. The dragonflies and mayflies of the Carboniferous did not need warm-blooded muscles or hollow bones to rise. The atmosphere itself carried them. With each flap, they found that the air would hold them easily, allowing them to hover, glide, and dance above the water. It was the first time life had broken from the pull of the earth. The forests that made this miracle possible were dense with decay and birth. Every tree that fell fed the soil, every leaf that sank fed the roots of the next. The swamps were both womb and grave, their gases rising in silver bubbles from black water. The planet was breathing through its forests, an ancient rhythm of growth and burial that changed the very texture of the sky. And deep within that cycle lay the quiet foundation for everything that would follow. The oxygen-rich air, the soft soil that held the remains of 1,000,000 fallen plants, the endless rain of sunlight, all these things built the stage for the future. The bones of flight were not yet formed, but the world had already begun to write the script. When the forests of the Carboniferous finally began to fall, as the climate shifted and continents collided, the air slowly thinned again. The vast swamps dried, and many of the giant insects vanished, yet their brief reign had left behind a lasting legacy. They had shown what was possible when air grew heavy enough to hold life. They had tested the boundaries of lift and balance, of motion against gravity. The Carboniferous world was not only the cradle of coal and oxygen, it was the birthplace of potential. The atmosphere it created would one day make possible the rise of the gliders, the pterosaurs, and the birds. The gift of air, once dense and full, remained even as it changed. If one could stand there now, in that ancient forest of shadows and vapor, and look upward, the sight would feel strange yet familiar. The air would shimmer with wings, not the leathery giants or feathered shapes we know, but delicate, glassy forms, tracing arcs of light above the swamp. The world had not yet learned to soar, but it was dreaming of it. In that dream, buried within every drop of air, lay the promise that one day, life would take the sky completely. Long before the first pterosaurs glided over ancient seas, and long before birds filled the air with song, the skies already had their rulers. They were not reptiles or mammals, nor anything familiar to us today. They were insects, immense, glittering, and strange. The age of the insect titans had begun. The world was still young then, draped in warmth and moisture. Swamps spread across entire continents, filled with towering plants and shallow pools where amphibians prowled. The air was thick and heavy, rich with oxygen that made every breath feel full. In that dense atmosphere, wings could lift bodies far larger than anything possible today. And so, evolution began to reach upward. From the shallows and forests rose creatures that seemed almost impossible. Dragonflies with wingspans longer than a hawk's, their bodies shimmering with metallic colors, their eyes vast and unblinking. These were the Meganeura, the great flyers of the Carboniferous and early Permian skies. With wings stretching over 2.5 feet, they were the largest insects the world has ever known. Imagine one gliding silently above a dark swamp. Beneath it, the forest floor rustles with giant millipedes and amphibians, their slick skin glinting in the dim light. The air hums with the buzz of smaller wings, and from high above, the shadow of the dragonfly passes across the water. Then, with a sudden burst of motion, it dives, the wings blur, the prey vanishes. The world's first aerial predator has struck. The Meganeura were hunters of the air, masters of both sight and speed. Their eyes contained thousands of lenses, able to track the faintest flicker of movement. Their wings, thin as glass but strong as reeds, caught every shift of wind. They hunted with precision, seizing other insects mid-flight, their legs curved like hooks to hold their prey. Nothing else in the air could match them. For tens of millions of years, the sky belonged to them alone, but they were not unchallenged. Below, the early amphibians were growing larger and more capable, adapting to both water and land. Some began to leap upward, snapping at insects that strayed too low. The air was no longer safe. What followed was one of Earth's earliest arms races, the endless contest between predator and prey, between speed and evasion, between flight and hunger. The insects grew faster, their wings stronger, their reflexes sharper. Some developed patterns and colors to hide among the leaves, while others darted too high or too erratically for predators to follow. The amphibians, in turn, became more agile, more coordinated, learning to strike at just the right moment. The balance of survival became a kind of dance, played out across skies that had never known such motion before. For millions of years, this strange balance endured. The forests pulsed with life, feeding oxygen into the atmosphere and fueling the enormous bodies of these winged hunters. The earth breathed deeply, and its creatures thrived in the warmth. But the world does not stay the same forever. Slowly, quietly, the climate began to shift. The great swamps that had covered the continents started to dry as the planet cooled. Trees that had once drawn in sunlight and released oxygen began to disappear. The atmosphere grew thinner, and the air that had once lifted the giants began to betray them. For creatures like Meganeura, size had always been their strength, and now it became their downfall. Their large bodies demanded more oxygen than the changing air could provide. Their wings, built for dense atmosphere, began to falter in thinner skies. Each generation grew smaller, lighter, and weaker. The forests grew quiet again, the humming of wings fading with the passing centuries. By the early Permian, the age of the insect titans was ending. The dragonflies of that time were still swift and graceful, but none reached the scale of their ancestors. The skies that had once been ruled by invertebrates were becoming emptier, waiting for something new. Below, in the shallows and forests, other creatures watched. Small reptiles, their limbs strong and their lungs efficient, had begun to test the world above the ground. They were not yet flyers, but they were learning how to climb, to leap, to glide. They were learning how to use air. The end of the giant insects was not a failure, but a passing of the torch. The thick, oxygen-rich atmosphere that had lifted their delicate wings had taught the planet what flight could be. Every flutter of a Meganeura's wing was a lesson written into the memory of Earth, a whisper to future ages that air could carry life, that gravity could be resisted, that the sky was not a barrier, but an invitation. As the Carboniferous twilight faded and the Permian dawn began, the last of the insect giants drifted above shrinking swamps. Their wings caught the final rays of a sun that gleamed faintly through the mist, a farewell shimmer of gold and green. Soon they would vanish, their bodies entombed in layers of coal and stone, yet their influence would remain forever. Long after they were gone, new creatures would rise, breathing the same air, dreaming the same impossible dream, to leave the ground, to lift against the wind, and to claim once more the open sky they had first discovered. If the history of life could be read like a book, flight would appear not as a single invention, but as a recurring dream. Across the long ages of Earth, three very different kinds of creatures found their way into the air. None were connected by blood or by chance. They were connected only by need, by curiosity, and by the strange, irresistible promise of the open sky. The first to rise were the insects, in the deep green world of the Carboniferous. The air then was rich and thick, and the forests endless. With delicate wings spun from the thinnest threads of life, they took the first trembling steps into the sky. Their bodies were simple, their movements instinctive, but they had done what no creature before them had managed. They had broken free of the ground. They did not need warm blood or hollow bones, only the air itself. The atmosphere lifted them gently, carrying them through the stillness above the swamps. Some hovered near the water's edge, others darted among ferns and mosses. And in their fragile ascent, the first whispers of true flight began. Millions of years passed. The forest changed. The air grew thinner, the insects smaller, but the idea of flight remained, waiting for its next form. It came again, this time through the bones of reptiles. During the Triassic and Jurassic, when dinosaurs still walked as kings of the land, their distant cousins discovered a different kind of sky. From the cliffs and coasts of ancient seas, creatures like Eudomorphodon and Dimorphodon stretched their wings and learned to glide. These were the pterosaurs, the first vertebrates to truly master powered flight. Their design was entirely new, unlike anything the world had seen. Their wings were not grown from leaves or light membranes like the insects. They were part of their own bodies, skin stretched between a single elongated finger and their sides. Within that soft structure lay veins, muscles, and nerves, forming a living machine of air and motion. The bone of the fourth finger lengthened into a slender spar, and the rest of the arm became an engine for lift. In time, they would grow larger and more capable, their flight muscles strong enough to launch them from flat ground, their bodies hollow yet powerful. They learned to glide across oceans, to climb invisible thermals, and to dive in silence upon prey. For 150 million years, they ruled the air as surely as their cousins ruled the land. And then, when their reign faded, when ash and cold silenced their cries, flight did not die with them. It found another host. From the shadows of the forests, small, feathered creatures began to stir. They were descendants of ground-running dinosaurs, their bodies covered not in scales, but in delicate plumes that first kept them warm. Over time, These feathers found a second purpose. They lengthened, forming shapes that could catch the air. Each leap grew longer, each glide more stable, until one day a set of wings beat against the sky for the first time. These were the birds, the inheritors of two worlds, the legacy of the reptiles, and the freedom of the air. Their design was unlike the pterosaurs, yet guided by the same silent principles. Hollow bones, lightweight frames, strong breast muscles, and an acute sense of balance, evolution had written a new version of the same story, shaped by different hands but inspired by the same dream. Flight had appeared again, born from necessity, but perfected through persistence. And still, the story was not over. Long after the age of reptiles had passed, in a world cooled and changed, mammals began to experiment with the air. From the dark corners of tropical caves and twilight forests, tiny creatures took to the night. Their wings were unlike feathers or scales, made instead from stretched skin and bone. These were the bats, the third and most recent architects of true flight. While the birds ruled the daylight, the bats claimed the dusk. Their flight was different, softer, quieter, more intimate. They could fold and twist their wings in ways no bird could, allowing them to hover, drift, and turn with ease. The world they explored was the realm of moonlight and echoes. They evolved sound into a kind of vision, using invisible waves to paint their surroundings. Theirs was a flight of silence, of mystery and mastery. Insects, reptiles, and mammals. Three separate paths, three different blueprints, one shared dream. Each solved the problem of gravity in its own way. Wings of chitin, of skin, of feather, each crafted by evolution's patient hand, guided not by intent, but by opportunity. The repetition of flight across time speaks to something deep within life itself. When the conditions align, when there is enough air, enough pressure, enough hunger, the same solution emerges. It is not coincidence, but convergence, nature meeting the same question again and again, and finding the same elegant answer. Flight is the purest expression of life's creativity. It is not only about escape or pursuit, but about exploration, a reaching beyond what seems possible. The sky was never meant for flesh and bone, yet again and again, life found a way to inhabit it. Today, as insects shimmer in sunlight, as birds cut through clouds, and bats trace arcs in the night, they carry with them that shared story, the memory of three beginnings, written across hundreds of millions of years. They are proof that the dream of flight was never a single invention, but a song sung in three different voices, across three distant ages, all in harmony with the same endless sky. After the forests and plains had long been conquered, after the rivers and cliffs had echoed with the sound of beating wings, there remained one final, endless wilderness, the sea. It stretched beyond sight, shimmering with light and depth, a vast mirror that reflected both the sun and the stars. For creatures that had already mastered the air, this new frontier was both a challenge and a promise. To cross the open ocean required more than wings. It demanded patience, endurance, and the ability to read the invisible language of the wind. On land, there were trees to rest upon, cliffs to launch from, thermals rising from warm soil. But above the sea, there was only the sky and the restless air that moved between storms. Those who learned to read that rhythm became the true masters of flight. It began, as so many great transformations did, with the pterosaurs in the Cretaceous world, when continents were still drifting and the seas were alive with ammonites and ancient fish. Great coastal hunters learned to follow the wind above the waves. Their wings were long and slender, their bodies light yet powerful. Some grew immense, their wings stretching longer than a small plane's, yet they glided with quiet grace. They had learned to use the thermals that rose from the sun-warmed water, invisible columns of air that lifted them higher with barely a movement. By tilting their wings at just the right angle, they could glide for hours without flapping, their shadows sliding across the surf far below. The sea gave them food, but it also gave them a path, a boundless space where no forest could block their way. When the pterosaurs fell with the age of dinosaurs, the sky above the oceans fell silent for a time. But evolution rarely leaves an empty space unfilled. The seabirds came, rising from the survivors of the extinction that had erased the giants. In them, the ancient dream of oceanic flight found a new voice. The early seabirds were not as massive as their predecessors, but they were no less extraordinary. Their feathers gave them an advantage unknown to the leathery wings of the past. Feathers could flex and reshape themselves in flight, adjusting to the smallest shift in the wind. They allowed birds to sail above the waves in near silence, rising on currents that were too faint to see. The ocean became their world. Some, like the early petrels, nested on rocky cliffs and hunted fish near the surface. Others ventured farther, following the paths of ocean currents that circled the globe. Over time, the most gifted gliders appeared, birds that could spend months without touching land. Among them, one lineage would perfect the art of the sea's endless journey, the albatross. To watch an albatross in flight is to see a living equation of balance and motion. With wings that can span over 3 meters, it glides on the edge of the wind, using almost no energy at all. It dips low to gain speed, then rises effortlessly on a gust, turning with the grace of something half air, half water. Scientists call this technique dynamic soaring, a dance between wind layers of different speeds. But to see it, even in the mind's eye, is to understand something far simpler. The albatross is a creature that has learned to live within the wind itself. Their journeys stretch across oceans, from pole to pole, tracing routes that have no beginning or end. They follow storms for thousands of miles, sleeping while gliding, eating as they skim the waves. When they return to land, it is only to nest and raise their young before vanishing again into the endless horizon. For them, the sea is not a boundary, it is home. Even smaller seabirds, like terns and shearwaters, share this quiet mastery. The Arctic tern, scarcely heavier than a handful of sand, travels from the Arctic to the Antarctic and back each year, the longest migration known in the animal kingdom. In a single lifetime, it may travel the equivalent of several trips to the moon and back, all by the strength of wind and instinct. Each ocean flyer, from the pterosaurs of the Cretaceous to the birds that sail today's currents, is part of a long, unbroken lineage of adaptation. The air above the sea has always been the hardest place to master, for it offers no rest and no mercy. Yet again and again, life found a way to belong there. The physics of flight changed in these open spaces. Over land, wings could be short and broad, made for quick turns and bursts of speed. But over the sea, the air demanded something else: endurance. Long, narrow wings reduced drag. Hollow bones lightened the load. Feathers and muscles worked together to catch invisible paths of lift. Nature shaped these travelers to be both tireless and serene. The ocean sky is the purest form of flight. It asks for nothing but trust. Trust in the wind, in the body, in the unseen forces that carry life across impossible distances. It is the place where flight sheds all excess and becomes its essence. Motion without effort, direction without walls. Today, as modern albatrosses glide over southern waters or frigate birds spiral high above the tropics, they are not merely survivors of ancient design. They are the living memory of every creature that ever rose to meet the wind. From the dragonflies of the Carboniferous to the pterosaurs of the Mesozoic, To the gulls that follow ships across modern seas, they carry the same message written softly into their wings, that life, once it has tasted the sky, will always return to it. And so, above the restless oceans, the story of flight continues, unbroken, like the wind itself, flowing endlessly over blue water across continents and ages in the quiet persistence of wings. All across the world, in every forest, mountain, and sea, there is a quiet rhythm that connects air and life, a slow exchange of breath between the sky and the earth below. Each wing beat, each drift of pollen, each distant glide over an ocean is part of this invisible cycle. Flight is not only movement through air, it is how the planet breathes. Long after the first wings unfolded and the sky filled with motion, flight began to shape more than just the creatures that possessed it. It began to shape the world itself. From the smallest bees to the wandering albatross, the act of flight became a bridge between life's distant corners, carrying the threads that bind ecosystems together. In the soft hum of a morning meadow, this connection is easiest to see. Bees and butterflies, their bodies dusted with golden pollen, move gently from flower to flower. To the plants, they are messengers, carrying life from one blossom to the next. Each visit ensures another seed, another future. The air that surrounds them is not empty. It is alive with invisible travelers, grains of pollen, spores, scents, and warmth. What seems delicate and small is, in truth, the foundation of forests, gardens, and the food webs that depend on them. As birds evolved, they joined this cycle in deeper ways. In tropical rainforests, flocks of fruit-eating birds scatter seeds across miles of canopy and soil. When they feed, they take the forest's future into their bodies, carrying it far beyond the shade of the parent trees. Some seeds pass through unharmed, landing in new soil carried on the wind or dropped from the air. Without these flyers, entire forests would fade. Many of the trees that rise today, towering, centuries old, and crowned with light, began their journey in the stomach of a bird. The same quiet partnership plays out in other places. In the deserts, nectar-feeding bats drift between night-blooming flowers, their wings whispering softly through the still air. They carry pollen across wide distances that even the wind cannot bridge. In the high Arctic, where life clings to a brief summer, insects take on the same role, ensuring that each bloom, no matter how brief, leaves behind a trace of itself before the cold returns. These movements are more than individual acts of feeding or flight. Together, they form a vast exchange where energy, nutrients, and genes move through air as freely as water flows through rivers. The sky is not separate from the earth. It is a highway of life. In coastal cliffs and remote islands, seabirds play another role in this grand system. They feed far out at sea, diving into cold waves and returning to land with the richness of the ocean still inside them. Their droppings, left on the rocks or in the soil, carry vital nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus, that fertilize entire ecosystems. In some islands, these colonies have transformed the land, turning bare stone into meadows of green. Even in death, their bodies return these nutrients to the earth, closing a cycle that began in flight. The same is true in forests, where birds of prey, scavengers, and carrion feeders clean and recycle what has fallen. Vultures circle above the savanna, sensing death on the wind, and by their work, disease is kept at bay. Every feathered scavenger, every insect that takes flight to feed, is part of the planet's quiet housekeeping. The air does not simply carry life upward, it redistributes it, keeps it balanced, keeps it breathing. Flight also moves the invisible, the microscopic seeds of algae, the spores of fungi, even the bacteria that shape weather itself. High above us, far beyond sight, Countless tiny forms of life drift on invisible currents, circling the globe. Some form the cores of clouds, helping water to condense into rain. Others travel across oceans, landing in new soils and sparking the growth of unfamiliar life. The breath of the planet is not still. It is always in motion, carried by wings seen and unseen, and while flight connects the living, it also connects the air itself. The stirring of countless wings mixes and churns the boundary between ground and sky. It helps to spread warmth, to lift scents, to carry moisture. Even the smallest creature, by rising from the earth, becomes part of this slow, continuous exchange. The beauty of flight lies not only in the freedom it gives, but in the harmony it maintains. It ties together the movements of clouds and forests, of tides and winds. Without flyers, the world would become silent in ways that go far beyond sound. The forests would thin, the flowers would fade, and the seas would lose their voice. Every feather, every wing, every fragile membrane beating against the air is part of the same pulse, the shared breath between land, sea, and sky. It is the whisper of a planet that keeps itself alive through motion, through exchange, through endless cycles of giving and return. In this rhythm, there is no boundary between air and earth. The sky is not a ceiling above life, but a continuation of it, an extension of the same living fabric. And every creature that has ever flown, from the smallest bee to the wandering albatross, carries within it a fragment of that connection, a reminder that even the air we breathe is alive with memory, movement, and purpose. Through flight, the planet breathes, slowly, endlessly, and together. The air around us feels invisible, weightless, and ordinary, yet it carries the memory of every age that has ever passed. Each breath we take contains atoms that once drifted through ancient forests, brushed the wings of pterosaurs, or rose as vapor from prehistoric seas. The sky may change color and shape, but its chemistry never truly forgets. To understand how flight first began, scientists have learned to read this memory, not from pages or fossils, but from the air itself, trapped and hidden across time. It is one of nature's quiet miracles that air, so light and fleeting, can leave a record at all. Yet deep within amber, inside cooled lava, and even locked within tiny mineral grains, traces of ancient atmospheres remain. Each is a window into the world as it once was, into the invisible environment that shaped wings, lungs, and the very limits of life. In laboratories, paleoclimatologists work with tools more delicate than scalpels and more precise than any clock. They study isotopes, the subtle variations in elements like oxygen and carbon. Each variation tells a story about how the planet once breathed. The ratio between oxygen's heavier and lighter forms reveals the temperature of ancient seas, the density of the air, and even how much life was drawing breath at the time. These clues, almost imperceptible, help reconstruct what the sky once felt like, the invisible stage upon which evolution performed its greatest experiment. In certain places, the record becomes more tangible. Drops of resin that once fell from trees in the Mesozoic hardened into amber, sealing away fragments of prehistoric air. Within those tiny bubbles, the past has been preserved at full scale, a ghost of the ancient atmosphere that once surrounded living things. Scientists who study them can measure the gases inside and estimate how much oxygen filled the skies millions of years ago. Some ambers reveal an air far richer than ours, when oxygen made up more than a third of the atmosphere. It was an age when insects could grow to the size of birds, and when flight seemed easier, almost effortless. Others capture the decline, showing how oxygen levels dipped and forced creatures to adapt or vanish. In these bubbles of golden stone, we glimpse the rise and fall of breathable worlds, the breath of time itself, sealed in glass. Volcanic rock holds another kind of record. When lava cools, it traps minute amounts of gas within its surface, locking in the composition of the atmosphere at that moment. Across millions of years, these trapped gases allow scientists to trace how air has shifted, the gradual decline of carbon dioxide, the slow rise of oxygen, the fluctuations that marked global warming and cooling long before humans ever walked the earth. By combining these chemical relics with computer models, researchers can simulate the skies of long-lost ages. They can recreate how air moved and how it felt to fly in it. Denser atmospheres, like those of the Carboniferous, offered lift with minimal effort. Wings could be broader and slower, riding air that felt thick and buoyant. In contrast, the thinner air of later ages demanded precision. Wings had to narrow, muscles strengthen, and flight become more calculated, more powerful. Through such modeling, scientists can test how pterosaurs, with their vast wingspans, manage to take off from the ground. They recreate the heat, pressure, and drag that those wings would have felt. In wind tunnels and virtual skies, replicas of ancient wings slice through the air, revealing truths hidden since deep time. Some models show that large pterosaurs could have launched themselves using their limbs as catapults, vaulting skyward with strength alone. Others suggest that thermal currents, invisible spirals of rising warm air, carried them effortlessly once they were aloft. These reconstructions go beyond curiosity. They remind us that every creature that ever flew did so within a specific kind of world. The shape of a wing, the rhythm of a heartbeat, even the limits of endurance, all are written by the air they moved through. If the atmosphere had been thinner or heavier, the very idea of flight might never have evolved in the same way. There is a quiet poetry in this work. Scientists spend years studying gases that once brushed the feathers of Archaeopteryx or filled the lungs of a Quetzalcoatlus. They read the traces of winds long vanished, and in doing so, they give breath back to the past. Every analysis, every data point, is another inhalation of Earth's memory, another attempt to understand how the sky shaped life, and how life, in turn, shaped the sky. To imagine standing in one of those ancient worlds is to feel the difference not only in what you see, but in what surrounds you. The air would have felt heavier, fuller, carrying the scent of ferns and distant storms. The sounds of wings would have been deeper, slower, resonating through a sky that held more than today's thin veil of gases. It was an atmosphere built for motion, for endurance, for the soaring of giants. And yet, even as the air changed, life followed. When oxygen rose, wings expanded. When it fell, muscles strengthened. The two evolved together, a shared rhythm between atmosphere and anatomy, between breath and movement. The work of reconstructing the ancient air is not only a study of chemistry, it is an act of remembering. Each trapped bubble, each isotopic clue, reminds us that the world we breathe today is only one chapter in an endless exchange. The same molecules that once lifted prehistoric wings now pass through our lungs. The same currents that shaped the first gliders still circle the planet. In every breath, the past is still with us, invisible, weightless, eternal. The air remembers, even when we forget. In quiet laboratories and hangar-like rooms filled with the soft hum of machines, scientists today are doing something extraordinary. They are bringing the sky of the prehistoric world back to life, not through imagination or illusion, but through the careful marriage of physics, paleontology, and engineering. Their goal is to understand how the largest creatures that ever flew could have possibly lifted from the ground, how their wings caught the air, and how the mechanics of those vanished bodies worked in the real world. The story of flight began in fossils, bones so thin they look almost too fragile to survive. Each one tells part of the tale, but never the whole. The bones alone do not move. They cannot show how a creature rose into the air or how the muscles flexed beneath the skin. Yet within those bones are clues, faint but precise, to something greater. Their shape, their weight, their hollow structure, all whisper of motion. Scientists have learned to listen. In wind, tunnels, where air is shaped and measured like a living force, replicas of ancient wings are tested. They are built to scale from materials that mimic the strength and flexibility of life. Thin membranes stretched over lightweight frames, their edges reinforced like those of real pterosaur wings. As the wind begins to flow, sensors track every movement, every ripple and vibration. The air reveals its secrets. The results are both humbling and astonishing. The pterosaur's wings were not static sails, they were dynamic, bending and twisting with the air. Their membranes were alive, adjusting to pressure changes in ways even modern aircraft cannot perfectly mimic. When the air struck the model's curved surface, it generated lift far greater than expected. For the first time, researchers could see how these prehistoric flyers turned, climbed, and glided, not by brute strength, but by subtle control. This discovery reshaped what we thought we knew. For years, scientists believed that the largest pterosaurs, like Quetzalcoatlus, were too massive to take off from flat ground. Some imagined them leaping from cliffs or catching powerful winds to become airborne. But as the models grew more precise and the tests more refined, a new picture emerged. It seemed that these creatures had solved a problem that still challenges engineers today. Using a technique called quadrupedal launch, they pushed off the ground with all four limbs at once. Their front wings acted like catapults, propelling their bodies forward and upward in a single, explosive motion. High-speed robotic replicas, designed to move with the precision of living anatomy, confirmed the theory. The motion was graceful, efficient, and powerful, the kind of movement that evolution had perfected long before machines were ever built. Each test brings the ancient sky closer. Robotic models move in ways the fossils once did. Artificial muscles pull and relax with real tension, and computer simulations recreate the pressure of prehistoric air against leathery skin. Some experiments use small drones, their wings patterned after pterosaurs, to test stability and turning ability in open flight. The data they collect feeds back into virtual models, refining every curve and every beat of an ancient rhythm. The collaboration between paleontologists and engineers has become its own form of evolution. The scientists who once studied bones now work alongside experts in aerodynamics, biomechanics, and robotics. Together, they reconstruct what cannot be observed, using technology to fill the space between the fossil and the sky. Every joint, every membrane, every fold of skin is tested not for imagination's sake, but for truth. Through these reconstructions, the pterosaurs are no longer just bones and stone. They are moving once again, their designs tested by the same air that shapes modern flight. Engineers studying their aerodynamics have already applied what they've learned to aircraft design, flexible wing edges, improved stability in turbulent wind, and energy-saving glides, inspired by creatures extinct for millions of years. Evolution's engineering, once buried in rock, is now influencing the machines that carry us through the air. But the beauty of this work is not just in its applications. It lies in the quiet wonder of rediscovery. Scientists watch as their models lift for the first time, the wings catching the air with the same grace they must have had over ancient coastlines. For a moment, the distance between past and present disappears. The hum of the wind tunnel becomes the whisper of deep time. In this merging of science and imagination, the impossible becomes real again. The researchers are not reviving the creatures themselves, but the physics that sustain them, the relationship between gravity, air, and movement that allowed the sky to be alive. The process is meticulous. Every test is repeated, every variable adjusted, every result questioned. It takes months to confirm a single detail, but this patience mirrors the slow creativity of evolution itself. Just as life once refined the wing through trial and error over millions of years, science refines its understanding through quiet persistence. When the models finally stabilize, gliding smoothly on currents of controlled air, something ancient returns, not in flesh, but in truth. We see how the world once worked, how physics and life shaped one another. In these laboratories, surrounded by hums and glowing screens, the past is not silent. It breathes through data, through motion, through the rise of synthetic wings that echo what nature once made real. The pterosaurs are not merely studied anymore, they are felt in the push of air against a model's skin, in the numbers that trace the lift of wings, in the shared human longing to understand how life learned to fly. Through science, we have learned to recreate the impossible, and in doing so, we have rediscovered not only the mechanics of flight, but the wonder of it, the same quiet marvel that once lifted the first wings into the wind. Across the long history of life, the earth has been shaped by many inventions: the rise of limbs, the creation of eyes, the birth of warm blood. Yet among all these transformations, none has changed the face of the planet quite like flight. It is one of evolution's rarest creations, a solution that appears only a few times in billions of years. And every time it does, it reshapes everything that follows. Flight is more than escape, it is the rewriting of limits. When life first lifted from the ground, gravity itself ceased to be an unbreakable law. The surface of the world, once crowded and confined, expanded into a new dimension. Those who learned to master the air gained access to resources, habitats, and opportunities that nothing else could reach. The sky became a new kind of wilderness, invisible, open, and full of possibility. To fly is to solve a puzzle written into the laws of physics. The forces that hold a body to the ground must be met with equal and opposite strength. Every wing is a compromise between lift and drag, between weight and motion. To achieve flight, evolution had to become an engineer, an artist, and a mathematician all at once. It sculpted bones into light arches, hollowed them like flutes to reduce weight yet preserve strength. It redesigned muscles to work tirelessly, reshaped hearts and lungs to feed the constant need for energy. The process took millions of years, and each step was tested by the air itself. Many forms failed, their wings too short or too stiff, their bodies too heavy or too slow. Yet in time, three great lineages would discover the same secret: insects, reptiles, and mammals. Each found its own way to rise. The gift of flight changed not only the creatures who gained it, but the world around them. The first insects transformed ancient forests, becoming the couriers of pollen and life. They linked plant to plant, spreading diversity across the continents. When reptiles took to the air, they brought predation to a good new level, hunting in dimensions their prey could scarcely imagine. And when birds inherited the sky, they brought with them color, song, and migration, the first great movements that stitched distant ecosystems together. Through flight, life became global. Seasons that once divided the world were bridged by wings. A single bird could see two poles within a year, following warmth and light across hemispheres. The air became a highway for travelers and a messenger for genes. Seeds, spores, and tiny organisms rode the wind alongside those who flew by their own power. In this way, the sky itself became part of the planet's circulation system, connecting forests, oceans, and deserts into one living network. The advantages of flight reached far beyond distance. In the air, food could be found in places untouched by competition. Insects fed on nectar, and the canopy's bounty. Birds dined on fruit, fish, and the swarming abundance of the air. Even bats, the only flying mammals, found freedom in the night, evolving sonar to guide them through darkness. Every new wing opened a niche, and every niche birthed more wings. But flight is costly. To sustain it, bodies had to become precise and efficient. The lightness that allows flight also demands fragility. A broken wing can mean death. A shift in wind or weather can erase the advantage of air. Evolution's masterpiece was never easy to maintain. It balanced on a knife's edge, a triumph of adaptation that always came with risk. Perhaps that is what makes flight so rare. Only a few creatures have ever solved its equation, but those that did changed everything. Through their movements, they carried life to new heights, literally and figuratively. They connected ecosystems that had once been isolated, distributing nutrients, seeds, and even ideas through their presence. In the slow patience of evolution, flight stands as one of its most intricate answers. It is a testament to creativity, not the kind born of intention, but of endless experimentation. Nature did not plan the wing any more than it planned the eye or the flower. It simply tried, again and again, shaping bone and muscle in countless ways until the air finally agreed to hold them. When viewed through the lens of time, the story of flight is not about domination but connection. The air made the world smaller and larger at once. It gave predators new vantage points, prey new defenses, and plants new partners. It wove life together with threads of wind and motion, turning isolation into interdependence. Today, every flutter of a butterfly, every soaring hawk, every bat tracing its silent arcs beneath the moon carries that same legacy. They are all echoes of the same ancient discovery, that the world does not end at the ground, that life can exist between earth and sky. Flight is not only an adaptation, it is evolution's finest art form, carved from physics, pressure, and persistence. It is beauty shaped by necessity, a moment of harmony between muscle and motion. And somewhere within that balance, between the struggle to lift and the surrender to air, lies one of the deepest truths of life itself. That to rise is to adapt, and to adapt is to create. Through flight, evolution did not just find a way to move through the world. It found a way to transcend it. When the dawn quiets and a bird glides across the pale light, it is not only a creature of the present that moves through the air. It carries with it an ancient memory, an echo of something that began long before feathers or songs, when wings were still an experiment written in bone and membrane. Every flap, every glide, every silent hover is a continuation of that first daring leap that life took into the sky. Though the great pterosaurs and insect titans are long gone, the principles that lifted them have never vanished. They remain in motion, living on through the birds that rise over coasts and forests, and through bats that fill the night with their soft and steady flight. These are not separate stories, but chapters in a single, unbroken tale, the story of air, motion, and survival shared across millions of years. The modern sky is quieter than it once was, yet it holds the same laws. Air still moves with the same weight, and gravity still calls all things back to the ground. Evolution has not forgotten how to answer that call. In the feathers of a sparrow and the leathery wings of a bat, one can see the same equations that once shaped the giants of the Cretaceous. The solutions are different, but the problem remains the same: how to turn air into freedom. Birds are the most visible heirs of this lineage. Their bodies are shaped by a perfection honed over deep time. Their bones are hollow but strong, latticed within like delicate architecture. Their feathers are living marvels, light as whispers, yet capable of controlling flight with precision. The feathers trap and redirect air in patterns so subtle that even engineers still study them. A bird's entire form, from its beak to its tail, is built for balance and motion, each part a note in the symphony of flight. Bats, though they came much later, found their own way to join that same eternal song. Their wings are not feathers, but living skin stretched between elongated fingers. Each movement of those thin membranes can shift the shape of the wing in midair, allowing controls so fine that a bat can weave through the branches of a forest in darkness. Their sense of space, guided by echoes, is as elegant as any sight. Where birds ride the day, bats inherited the night, not in competition, but in harmony, filling the hours the sunlight leaves behind. Despite their differences, the two share the same ancient lessons. Both understand the balance between power and grace, between effort and surrender. Both know how to read the invisible world of air, the thermals that rise, the eddies that curl behind cliffs, the pressure that changes with each beat of a wing. Each flight, whether in daylight or moonlight, is a quiet act of mathematics performed by instinct. It is survival shaped into art. The continuity between these creatures and those who came before them lies deeper than their forms. It is found in their instincts, in their responses to wind and hunger and migration. The same survival rhythms that once pulsed in pterosaur veins still guide birds across oceans. The same awareness of space that helped early gliders find balance now lets bats hunt with unerring precision. The sky, though empty of its ancient monsters, still teaches those who dare to rise. In a way, the birds and bats of today are living fossils, not in body, but in behavior. They keep the memory of what flight once meant, a way to reach beyond the boundaries of the world below. When they soar or dive, they trace paths that have been drawn countless times before by wings now turned to stone. Their freedom is both new and ancient, shaped by all who learned before them. Even their migrations echo old journeys. The patterns of movement written in their genes follow paths once traced by prehistoric winds. Across continents, flocks move like drifting continents of air, linking ecosystems as the pterosaurs once did. Each wingbeat stirs not just the present air, but the memory of skies that stretched over worlds now buried beneath time. And if one looks closely enough, the differences between these living flyers and their distant ancestors begin to fade. Both are built from the same logic of nature's engineering, to balance lift with weight, strength with delicacy, and instinct with adaptation. The air asks the same questions it always has, and life continues to answer. The echo of those answers is all around us. It hums in the flutter of pigeons taking off from city streets, in the silhouettes of geese carving through twilight, in the soft rush of a bat brushing past in the dark. The air still holds their music, just as it once held the roaring wings of the pterosaurs. To watch a bird glide is to see time itself in motion. To listen to the faint click of a bat's sonar is to hear the same curiosity that once drove ancient creatures to leap and test the wind. Flight, even now, remains evolution's longest conversation, a dialogue between life and the invisible medium that carries it. And so the sky endures as both memory and promise. Every wing that moves through it, no matter how small, carries the imprint of what came before. The air remembers every flight, every fall, every rise. The echo of wings will never truly fade, because the sky has never stopped being alive. The story of flight did not end when the last pterosaur fell silent. Though their wings no longer darken the horizon, something of them lingers, in stone, in bone, and perhaps even in imagination. The air they once ruled still carries their memory, woven quietly into the shape of life and the stories we tell about what once soared above us. Every creature alive today bears, in some hidden way, the legacy of those early masters of the sky. Evolution does not forget. It refines, reshapes, and reuses. In the hollow bones of birds, in the stretch of a bat's membrane, and even in the lightness of the insect's wing, The same principles that lifted the ancient pterosaurs are still at work. The logic of the air has not changed, only the forms that move through it. Deep within the genes of modern flyers lie the echoes of that ancient experiment. Many of the same developmental blueprints that shaped a pterosaur's elongated fingers now guide the growth of wings in birds and bats. In embryos, one can watch these hidden instructions play out like a remembered melody. A bird's skeleton begins with arms much like any other vertebrate, then gradually transforms as the blueprint unfolds, bones thinning, joints shifting, feathers emerging from skin. In each motion of life building itself, there is continuity. The past does not vanish, it evolves. Even in creatures that never left the ground, traces of this ancient legacy remain. The structures that once supported wings became adapted for other purposes. The shoulders that once anchored flight muscles now serve digging, running, or grasping. Evolution reuses its designs, never starting from nothing, but from memories stored in the body's very architecture. The sky monsters may be gone, but their influence ripples quietly through the anatomy of nearly every vertebrate alive today. Yet their legacy extends far beyond biology. It reaches into the human mind, into the realm of myth, imagination, and wonder. Long before we understood the true age of fossils, people found them scattered across the land. Enormous bones turned up in riverbeds, cliffsides, and deserts. To the ancient eye, they were the remains of something both real and impossible. A jaw the size of a man's arm, teeth like knives, wings preserved in stone. The earth itself seemed to speak of dragons. Across the world, civilizations told stories that may have been born from these discoveries. In China, fossils of flying reptiles were collected and ground into powders long before they were recognized as ancient creatures. The people who found them called them dragon bones. In the deserts of the Middle East, where erosion uncovered strange winged fossils, tales of winged serpents and sky spirits began to spread. Even in Europe, where limestone quarries occasionally revealed the outlines of pterosaurs, the imagination filled the sky with monsters long before science could name them. It is possible that our oldest myths of dragons and angels carry the distant memory of these sky rulers. The dragon's folded wings, its sinuous body, its command of the air, all mirror the forms of creatures once real. Angels, too, are often drawn with wings not like those of birds, but broader, stranger, almost reptilian. Perhaps our ancestors, staring at fossils half buried in stone, felt something stir, a recognition that the sky had once been filled with beings greater than anything that walked the ground. Even today, that fascination endures. Every culture, in its own way, dreams of flight. The longing to rise above the world, to glide over oceans and mountains, to defy gravity itself, is part of what makes us human. We build wings of metal and call them airplanes. We study wind, pressure, and motion to imitate what nature perfected millions of years ago. In our art and our language, we still honor those who flew before us. We give them names like dragons, griffins, phoenixes. We call the brave eagles and the fast falcons. In every metaphor that ties flight to freedom, the ancient sky monsters live on. The fossils that survive today are more than remnants of bone and stone. They are records of movement, of breath, of daring. Each imprint of a wing in rock is like a pressed leaf from an ancient wind, a frozen gesture from a time when the world was still learning to lift itself from the ground. Through them, we remember that life once pushed against the boundaries of air and gravity, and won. Even science, which now understands their anatomy and their physics, still stands in quiet awe of them. Engineers study their wings to design better aircraft. Artists paint them into skies they never saw. Children trace their silhouettes and imagine them gliding again. The pterosaurs have long vanished, yet their image feels familiar, as if our minds have always known them. Perhaps this is because we, too, are creatures of the same planet. The air that filled their lungs now fills ours. The winds that lifted their wings still move across the earth. When a bird takes flight today, it does not just echo its own ancestors, but all who ever rose into the sky. The legacy of the sky monsters is not just in fossils or genes. It is in the shared memory of movement, a whisper that reminds us that life is not bound to the ground. The sky, once theirs, is still alive with their presence. Every shadow that passes overhead carries a trace of them, a reflection of what was and what endures. For as long as wings continue to beat in the air, the world will remember. The sky, shaped by the ghosts of its first rulers, keeps their story alive, not in thunder or roar, but in the quiet, endless motion of flight. When we look upward, the same blue vault stretches above us that once carried the wings of giants. It has not aged, though everything beneath it has. The sky that held Quetzalcoatlus soaring over Cretaceous plains is the same sky that now watches airplanes trace silver lines across its face, the same sky that listens to the hush of swallows in the evening. The air has thinned and thickened, cooled and warmed, but it remains the same invisible sea that life has always tried to cross. The sky is eternal not because it never changes, but because it always receives. It takes in the dust of every era, the breath of every creature that ever lived, the whisper of every storm that ever passed. The winds we feel today carry molecules that once brushed against the wings of pterosaurs, that passed through the feathers of the first birds, that filled the lungs of ancient mammals climbing from the shadow of extinction. In this way, the sky remembers. Every breeze is a messenger. It tells stories of ages that left no witnesses, of mornings that rose over continents no longer here. The air moves across oceans, deserts, and mountains, blending the past into the present. When it stirs the trees, it is easy to imagine that something vast and gentle passes through. The ghosts of wings once spread wide above prehistoric seas, their movements now scattered into whispers of wind. Life has always looked to the sky for meaning. It is both promise and mystery, freedom and danger. The creatures that conquered it found a kind of transcendence unknown to those that remained below. For them, the sky was not just space. It was survival, migration, and mastery. To fly was to escape the weight of the earth for a moment and become part of something larger than the ground could hold. But even as the sky offered life its greatest gift, it demanded precision. Flight is fragile. It is a perfection of balance, a harmony between lift and gravity that can collapse with a single error. A broken feather, a torn membrane, a shift in the wind, and the miracle of motion becomes a fall. Every flyer that ever lived has known this tension, the delicate thread between life and loss. Yet that fragility is what gives flight its beauty. The sky never grants permanence, only the grace of a moment held in balance. Perhaps that is why we are still drawn to it. The sight of a bird, gliding at sunset, carries something ancient within us. It is a memory of all that came before, of the first insects trembling above ferns, of pterosaurs carving paths through humid air, of early birds learning to fold their wings against the wind. The rhythm of those movements is written into our awareness, as if we, too, remember the shape of freedom even without wings of our own. Science tells us that the air itself is a cycle of endless exchange. What one creature exhales becomes the breath of another. In this way, we all share the sky, from the smallest insect to the largest whale that surfaces for air. The same oxygen that fuels our bodies was once part of the breath that lifted ancient life into flight. Each inhale is a reunion with history, a quiet reminder that nothing in nature is truly gone. When we stand beneath the clouds, it can feel as though we are looking at something distant. Yet the sky is not far away. It begins just above our heads, where the air first grows thin and cool. It is part of us, part of every heartbeat that sends oxygen through our veins. The flight of the giants, though millions of years removed, still lingers within that shared atmosphere. The invisible medium that held them is the same one that cradles us now. In quiet moments, when the world slows, it is easy to feel that continuity. The wind moves softly through the trees, the same way it once brushed across tropical forests, filled with the sound of leathery wings. The moon rises over still water, its reflection trembling as it did when it watched the first shadows cross its light. The stars, patient and indifferent, have seen every shape of life that ever rose toward them. The sky keeps no monuments. Its memory is carried not in stone or fossil, but in motion. Every wingbeat that ever was, every glide, every fall, every ascent, became part of the air's long conversation with gravity. The pterosaurs may be gone, their bones turned to dust and rock, yet the rhythm of their flight endures in the same currents that lift gulls and kites and planes today. To live beneath this eternal sky is to be part of that story. Even without wings, we share its inheritance. We build our dreams upward, we chase clouds, we imagine freedom in the shape of flight. Perhaps we do this because somewhere deep within the fabric of life, the sky has left its imprint. Evolution may have sculpted the wing, but the longing for it, that quiet pull toward the open air, remains in all of us. So when the wind touches your face, remember that it is not only air, it is history, memory, and motion intertwined. It has moved across ages and carried the traces of beings far older than we can imagine. The sky above us, endless and calm, is not empty. It is full of echoes, the ghosts of wings, the breath of worlds gone by, the gentle reminder that life's most fragile invention is also its most enduring. And as long as something still rises into the air, whether bird or bat or the faint hum of an insect, the legacy continues. The sky remains eternal, vast, forgiving, and alive with the memory of flight. The story of flight is older than memory. It is written in the wind, in the curve of a feather, in the stone wings pressed into the earth's crust. The forgotten age when monsters ruled the sky has passed into silence, yet its echo endures all around us. Every shadow that crosses the clouds, every distant bird gliding over the sea, is a small reflection of what once was. The pterosaurs are gone, their bones turned to dust, their shapes remembered only in fragments of limestone and the careful hands of scientists who bring them back to life with imagination and study. But through those fragments, we can still trace the outline of a world that once breathed differently. We can feel the weight of wings that stretched wider than any bird alive today, and imagine the sound of air folding beneath them as they rose into sunlight that has not touched the earth in millions of years. Their story is not only about extinction, but about endurance. The sky they mastered still carries the imprint of their passage. Life learned from them, adapted their lessons, and carried them forward in new forms, from the soft feathers of the sparrow to the echolocating flight of the bat. Nature never truly ends a story. It simply rewrites it in different shapes. Even in stone, the traces of these sky rulers speak of life's persistence. Fossils are not merely bones or impressions. They are memories set in mineral. Each one is a message from a time so far removed that our minds can barely reach it. Yet here they are, silent and solid, telling us that everything that once lived still matters. The mightiest may fall, but their existence continues to guide the living. When we study these fossils, we do more than uncover the past. We reawaken forgotten chapters of our planet's history. Each discovery is an act of remembrance. The world beneath our feet is a library written in rock, and every new fossil is a sentence revealed from a language that life has been writing for billions of years. It is easy to think of the pterosaurs as creatures of fantasy, too strange, too vast, too distant from our own experience. Yet they were real as the birds that sing outside your window. They breathed air we still breathe, flew under the same moon, and watched the same stars. Time separates us, but the sky connects us still. Their age reminds us that nothing on Earth is permanent. Even the greatest designs of evolution fade. Oceans dry, continents shift, climates change, and life must either adapt or vanish. The pterosaurs, for all their majesty, were not spared, but their extinction is not only a story of loss, it is a lesson in humility. It shows how even the most perfect form of life is part of a larger rhythm: creation, transformation, renewal. The sky they ruled is still here. It waits above us, quiet and endless, filled with stories that have yet to be told. Every fossil pulled from the ground adds another thread to the tapestry of Earth's memory, and every time we look upward, we see not only what is, but what has been. This age of forgotten wings invites us to listen more closely, not just to the past, but to the world around us now. The same processes that shaped the bones of the pterosaurs still shape life today. The same delicate balance between survival and extinction continues. We live in a time when species vanish faster than ever before, their stories cut short before they can be written into stone. To learn from the past is to remember that loss, once it happens, cannot be undone. Exploring these hidden histories helps us understand not just how life survived, but how fragile it truly is. It teaches us that beauty and strength can exist for millions of years, only to vanish in an instant. Yet, in their disappearance, the pterosaurs left behind something profound, proof that even after all has fallen silent, the Earth remembers. The fossils that line museum halls are more than relics. They are bridges. They connect us to lives that once fluttered through air as easily as we walk on land. They remind us that our story is part of a continuum, that we are not the first to dream of the sky, nor will we be the last. So tonight, as the stars rise and the wind drifts through open air, take a quiet moment to look upward. The sky you see is ancient. It has carried the wings of dragons, the shadows of titans, and now the contrails of our own inventions. We have become part of the same narrative, creatures still reaching upward, still chasing the horizon. The forgotten age when sky monsters ruled the earth may have ended long ago, but its spirit endures in every breath of air, every movement of life, and every curious gaze turned toward the heavens. And perhaps that is the truest legacy of all, not the bones left in stone, but the wonder that still rises whenever we look to the sky and imagine what once flew there. Thank you for traveling through time with me, through winds that no longer blow and skies that once belonged to giants. If this story has stirred your curiosity, let it guide you to more, to the ancient, the hidden, and the almost forgotten chapters of our planet. Because every rock, every fossil, every whisper of air carries a story worth remembering. Now, take a deep breath. Let it fill you with the same air that once lifted the wings of the greatest flyers the world has ever known. And when you exhale, let it drift softly into the night, back into the eternal sky that has never stopped watching.